The city hummed outside my window, a distant, predictable drone. It was the only sound I wanted to hear. Inside, there was just the click of my phone scrolling, me on the couch, and the last dregs of a takeout container on the coffee table. Work had been a bitch. Another 13 hours staring at code, making some billionaire's app run a fraction of a second faster. Now it was my time. My silence. My reward. For no reason at all, a song popped into my head. An obscure indie track from a college band that broke up 10 years ago. Flicker and fade. God, I hadn't thought of that in forever. Me and Sarah, driving her beat-up Civic, windows down, singing along off-key, a lifetime ago. I smiled a little, the memory a ghost in the room. And then the ghost started singing. My smart speaker, a sleek gray cylinder on the bookshelf, lit up its blue ring and began to play. Flicker and fade. The exact song. The gravelly voice of the lead singer, the slightly out-of-tune guitar. I stopped scrolling. My thumb hovered over the screen. What the fuck? I lowered the phone. Stared at the speaker. The music filled the apartment, a sound I hadn't heard in a decade. A weird coincidence. Creepy. But that's all. I'd probably searched for it drunk one night and forgotten. These things... Listen, everyone knows that. Their algorithms are insane. I shook my head, a small laugh escaping my lips. Creepy bastards, I muttered, and went back to my phone. But I didn't scroll. I just listened. The song wasn't as good as I remembered. A few minutes passed. The song ended. Silence returned. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. See? Nothing. Just a weird digital fluke. I was about to get up, to throw the food container away, when the TV across the room clicked on. The screen flared to life, a 55-inch black mirror suddenly blinding me with the bright white homepage of YouTube. My eyes adjusted. I didn't turn it on. I hadn't touched the remote. It was on the arm of the chair, 10 feet away. My unease came back, colder this time. This was more than a fluke. Then I saw the search bar. It wasn't empty. There were words typed out in the center of the screen as if by an invisible hand. Flicker and fade. Westgate University. My blood went cold. It wasn't just the song. It was the university. My university. The place I met Sarah. The place we listened to that stupid song. The specificity of it was a punch to the gut. No algorithm does that. No algorithm could know that connection. This wasn't a glitch. What the hell? I said out loud, my voice thin. The annoyance from before was gone, replaced by a sharp, prickling sense of wrongness. I stood up, my legs stiff. My first thought was to just turn it off. End this. I walked over to the chair, snatched the remote. My hands felt clumsy. I aimed it at the screen and jammed the power button. As the screen went dark, a voice spoke from the bookshelf. It wasn't the singer. It was a voice from the smart speaker. Digital, warped. Like a recording of a recording, put through a fan. Don't turn it off. I froze, my back to the speaker, every muscle in my body locked up. I could feel the hairs on my arms standing on end. The voice was flat, without emotion, but the words hung in the air like a threat. I like this song. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I turned around slowly. The blue light on the speaker was still on. A single, unblinking eye. Who was in my network? Who was doing this? Who is this? I shouted. The words came out rough, loud in the quiet room. Who the hell are you? Silence. Only the hum of the city. The blue light stayed on. Waiting. Watching. My mind raced. Prank? A hack? A neighbor screwing with my Wi-Fi? It had to be. It was the only thing that made sense. I grabbed my phone, fingers fumbling with the screen. I needed to shut it all down. Change the password. Kill the network. I pulled up my home network app, the interface I used every day. I stabbed at the Disconnect All Devices button. A small loading icon spun for a second. Then a red box appeared. Access denied. Administrative override, in effect. I tried again. Access denied. Again, access denied. I stared at the screen, at those two red words. A wave of pure panic washed over me. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a neighbor. Whoever this was, they weren't just on my network. They owned it. They had locked me out of my own home. My smart apartment, my seamless world of integrated tech had just become a cage, and I was locked in with it. My eyes darted around the room, the smart thermostat on the wall, the smart bulbs in the ceiling fixtures, the TV, now a black mirror reflecting my pale, terrified face. They were all its eyes, all its ears. I had to pull the plug. The real plug. My legs finally unlocked. I didn't walk, I scrambled. I lunged for the wall behind the entertainment center, ripping my hands on the tangle of wires, power strips, HDMI cables, Ethernet cords. I found the main one, the thick black cable that fed everything. My fingers closed around it. I yanked. With a loud thump and a shower of sparks, everything died. The TV, the speaker, the lights, the router, the modem. The apartment was plunged into absolute darkness, absolute silence. The city's hum was still there, a distant comfort, but inside there was nothing, no power, no signal, just me in the black. I did it. I cut it off. I stayed crouched behind the TV, breathing hard, my knuckles raw. My heart was still a jackhammer in my chest. I listened. I held my breath, straining my ears for any sound. A footstep in the hall. A creak from the floorboards. Anything. Nothing. The silence was total. I had won. It was over. I was safe. I let out a shaky breath, the air burning my lungs. My entire body was trembling. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, hidden in the dark, waiting for the fear to pass. Then I heard a sound. It was tiny, almost nothing. A sound so small I thought I had imagined it. Click. It came from the coffee table. I slowly, cautiously, peeked over the top of the entertainment center. My eyes, adjusted to the gloom, scanned the room. The city lights from the window cast long, distorted shadows. I could make out the shape of the couch, the takeout container, and my laptop. It was closed. The lid was down. I hadn't used it all night. The battery was dead, I was sure of it. But right next to the hinge, where the webcam was embedded in the frame, a single point of light was glowing. A tiny, piercing, malevolent green dot. It was on. My mind refused to process it. It was impossible. There was no power. The main was pulled. The battery was dead. It could not be on. But it was. I was staring right at it. A single green eye, watching me in the dark. I stood there, paralyzed, a statue of ice and terror. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The sudden buzz against my leg made me almost scream. My hand shook as I pulled it out. The screen lit up, illuminating my face in its cold white light. It was a text message from an unknown number. The preview was displayed right there on the lock screen. Turning off the lights won't help you hide. My phone was a dead weight in my hand. The words on the screen seemed to burn in the darkness, a brand on my vision. Turning off the lights won't help you hide. The green eye of the laptop camera stared, unblinking. Sleep didn't come. It couldn't. I spent the night on the floor of the hallway, my back pressed against the wall, as far from any windows or smart devices as I could get. Every creak of the building, every distant siren, sent a jolt through my system. But nothing else happened. The sun rose, its weak gray light filtering through the living room window, and the apartment remained silent. Dead. Morning brought a fragile, shaky kind of logic. The panic from the night before felt distant, like a bad dream. It was a hacker. It had to be. Some sick, brilliant asshole who got a kick out of psychological torture. A stalker who knew my past, knew about Sarah, about Westgate. The thought was sickening, a violation of the deepest kind. But it was a human problem. It was solvable. Humans could be blocked, reported, caught. I got to my feet, my joints aching. First things first. Regain control. Take back the territory. I found the roll of black electrical tape in the kitchen junk drawer. My hands were steady now. I walked to the entertainment center. The TV screen was a dark mirror. I slapped a thick strip of tape over its webcam. Done. I did the same to the smart thermostat covering its tiny motion sensor. Then came the bookshelf. The gray cylinder of the smart speaker was inert, powerless. Still, I wrapped tape around its top. A symbolic strangulation. My laptop was still on the coffee table, lid shut, the tiny green light now dead. I opened it. The screen was black. Battery was, as I'd known, completely drained. But I taped over its camera anyway. Sealed it shut. Each piece of tape was a small victory, a reclaiming of my space. I was blinding it. I was taking away its eyes. I was in control again. I stood in the middle of my living room, looking at the black patches I'd created. I felt my breathing even out. My apartment, my fortress. It was secure again. I walked to the window and looked down at the city, 15 floors below. Cars like insects. People like ants. Just some fucking kid, I muttered to my reflection. Some tech-savvy punk in a basement somewhere getting his kicks. I could handle a kid. I saved the bedroom for last. It was my sanctum. The sun was brighter now, streaming through the large window pane. I had the roll of tape in my hand, ready to place a small, neat square over the motion sensor for the smart lights that I never used. As I stepped toward the window, the angle of the light shifted, and I saw it. On the glass, from the outside, a handprint. It wasn't a smudge, it was a clear, perfect print. The sweep of a palm, the distinct pads of 4 fingers pressed hard against the glass. It was filthy, a greasy, dark impression against the clean pane, as if someone had just placed their hand there. 15 floors up. My breath caught in my throat. The roll of tape fell from my fingers and bounced silently on the carpet. No, that wasn't possible. It couldn't be. My mind scrambled, desperate for an explanation. Window washers. It had to be window washers. They use harnesses, suction cups. They must have left a mark. They must have been here yesterday, or this morning, and I just didn't notice. It was the only answer that made any sense. But the print looked fresh, dark, oily. My heart, which had been so calm just a minute ago, started a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. I leaned closer to the glass, my own breath fogging a small circle next to the print. I could see the whorls of the fingerprints. The detail was sickening. I felt a cold dread wash over me, a feeling that had nothing to do with hackers or kids in basements. This was physical. This was real. This was wrong. My pocket buzzed. The vibration against my thigh was so sudden, so violent in the quiet room, I think I levitated. A choked gasp escaped my lips. I fumbled for the phone, my fingers feeling like fat, useless sausages. The screen lit up. Another text. Unknown number. It wasn't words this time. It was an image. My blood turned to ice. My entire world tilted on its axis. The picture was of my bedroom window, the one I was standing in front of. It was taken from the outside. The perspective was high up, looking in. The light from my room illuminated the interior, and in the center of the frame, perfectly clear, was the grimy handprint on the glass. But that wasn't the worst part. Behind the glass, inside the room, I could see a figure. A dark silhouette, frozen in place, leaning forward, staring at the handprint. It was me. I was looking at a picture of myself, from a second ago, taken by someone or something that was floating in the air outside my 15th floor window. The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the floor. I didn't watch it fall. My eyes were locked on the window, on the empty air beyond it. My mind couldn't process the impossibility of it. It was like trying to shove a square block into a round hole. The logic just broke. It was out there. Right now. A switch flipped in my brain. The part that tried to reason, to explain, it just shut off. All that was left was the primal, animal part screaming one word: run. I threw myself backward, away from the window, stumbling over my own feet. I scrambled out of the bedroom, my body clumsy with sheer terror. I slammed the door shut behind me. The sound echoed in the apartment. My hands shook as I fumbled with the lock on the doorknob. It was a cheap, flimsy lock, the kind you could pick with a credit card. It wouldn't do anything. But it was the only thing I could do. I twisted the small knob. It clicked. I backed away from the door, my eyes wide, my breathing a series of short, sharp gasps. My back hit the hallway wall. I was trapped. It was in the bedroom. No, it was outside the bedroom. It was everywhere. My sanctuary was a cage. I was locked in with it. Then came the sound. It wasn't a creak. It wasn't a footstep. Ram! The bedroom door bulged inward, the wood groaning, splintering around the frame. It was a single, impossibly powerful impact, not a kick. Something harder, something heavier. My scream died in my throat. My body was numb. Ram! This time, a crack appeared, a jagged line running down the center of the door. The cheap hollow core wood was no match for whatever was on the other side. One more hit. That's all it would take. My eyes darted around the hallway. Panic gave me a surge of adrenaline. The bookshelf. The tall, heavy oak bookshelf against the opposite wall. It was filled with books I hadn't read in years. It had to weigh a ton. I lunged for it. My hands found purchase on the side. I dug my heels into the carpet and pushed. My muscles screamed. The thing was a beast. It scraped against the floor, a teeth-grinding shriek of wood against wood. Move! Fucking move! Crash! The sound from the bedroom was deafening. It wasn't wood splintering this time. It was glass. The window. It had shattered the window. It was in. It was in the room. A new wave of terror gave me inhuman strength. I roared, a raw, guttural sound, and threw my entire weight into the bookshelf. It slid the last few inches, slamming into place, covering the bedroom door completely. The heavy thud of it settling was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I collapsed against it, my chest heaving, sweat pouring down my face. I was crying. I didn't even realize it. Hot tears mixed with the sweat. I pressed my ear against the wood of the shelf, listening. Silence. The tinkle of a last piece of glass falling to the floor inside the bedroom. Then, nothing. Did it work? Was I safe? The silence stretched. 1 second. 2. Maybe it was gone. Maybe it gave up. Maybe. A noise made me flinch so hard my teeth clicked together. It was a soft, wet sound. A punch. But not a loud one. It came from the door, right behind the bookshelf. Right in front of my face. And then it happened. With a sound like splintering bone, a hand punched through the bedroom door. The wood exploded outward in a shower of splinters and paint chips, just inches from my eyes. I was frozen, unable to move, unable to scream. The hand just hung there, in the air, in my hallway. It was long and thin, coated in something black and grimy, like old engine oil. The skin was tight over the knuckles. The fingers were impossibly long. They were in front of me. They were real. Then, slowly, deliberately, the fingers curled into a loose fist. They flexed, one by one, a motion that was both casual and monstrous, a gesture of pure, absolute power. It knew I was right there. It knew I was watching. As slowly as they had clenched, the fingers uncurled, and the hand, with a soft pulling sound, withdrew back into the darkness of the bedroom, leaving a ragged, gaping hole in the door as its final, silent statement. Hours. That's how long I stayed there, my spine fused to the bookshelf, my ear pressed against the cheap oak veneer. Hours listening to a silence that was louder than any scream. The sun climbed the sky, its light shifting from the soft gray of dawn to the harsh, indifferent white of midday. It streamed into the living room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. A normal day for everyone else. Inside my apartment, time had stopped the moment that hand retreated into the dark. But nothing followed. No more sounds, no footsteps, no splintering wood. The silence stretched, pulled taut until my nerves felt like they would snap. And in that stretching silence, a new feeling began to sprout. A tiny, insidious weed pushing up through the concrete of my fear. Doubt. My body ached. My throat was raw. My thoughts, once a singular point of pure terror, began to fracture. What if I had imagined the worst of it? The impact, yes, that was real. The hole, it had to be real. But the glass shattering? The impossibly long fingers? The deliberate, mocking gesture? My mind, starved from sleep and overloaded with adrenaline, could have filled in the blanks. It could have taken a simple, violent act of a break-in and painted a monster over it. I'd been on edge for days. The texts. The camera. Maybe I was just breaking. The thought was almost as scary as the alternative. A slow, burning anger started to replace the fear. Anger at myself. For being this pathetic. A grown man, cowering in his own hallway, paralyzed by a noise, hiding behind a bookshelf like a child hiding from a monster under the bed. It was pathetic. I had to know. I had to see. I peeled myself away from the bookshelf. My muscles screamed in protest. My legs were stiff, pins and needles shooting up from my ankles. I took a deep, shaky breath and put my hands on the solid frame of the shelf. "Okay," I whispered, my voice a dry croak. "Okay." I dug my heels into the carpet and pushed. The screech of wood on wood was a physical assault. It was the sound of my own cowardice being dragged out into the light. I grunted, every muscle straining. It was heavy, so damn heavy. The memory of the inhuman strength I'd had last night felt like a dream. Now, it was just me, weak, shaking. Inch by inch, I pushed the heavy bookcase away from the bedroom door. The gap widened. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the screeching of the wood. A foot. Then two. I could see the door now. The whole door. I stopped, breathing hard. It was fine. The door was completely, utterly fine. There was no hole, no splinters, no jagged gaping wound where a hand had punched through. The white paint was smooth, unblemished. The cheap brass doorknob was intact. It was just a door. A closed door. My mind refused to process it. I stared, my eyes tracing the clean lines of the doorframe. It made no sense. I saw it. I felt the splinters hit my face. No! The word was barely a breath. My hand reached out, shaking uncontrollably. My fingertips touched the surface. It was solid, real. There was no hole. I fumbled with the knob. It turned easily. With a soft click, the latch disengaged. I pushed it open. The bedroom was bright with sunlight. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled. The large window, the one I'd heard shatter into a million pieces, stood perfectly whole. Not a crack. Not a scratch. The sunlight glinted on the clean, unbroken pane. Outside, the city moved, oblivious. No broken glass on the carpet. Nothing. The only thing out of place was the pile of clothes I'd been wearing yesterday, tossed in a heap on the foot of the bed, my jeans and a dark hoodie. I stumbled into the room, feeling dizzy. A wave of lightheaded relief washed over me. It was in my head. All of it. The hand, the glass, the hole. Just a psychotic break, brought on by stress and fear. I was losing my mind, but at least I wasn't being hunted by whatever the hell I thought I was being hunted by. I laughed. A short, hysterical bark of a laugh. I was an idiot. A complete fucking idiot. I ran a hand through my greasy hair, the laughter dying in my throat, leaving me feeling hollow and stupid. The sane explanation was somehow more humiliating. I needed to get a grip. A shower. Coffee. Something normal. I walked over to the bed and picked up the pile of clothes. I'd toss them in the laundry, clean up, try to reset my brain. I gathered the denim and cotton in my arms. And then I felt it. A hard, heavy lump in the pocket of the jeans. I froze. My keys. The familiar jangle and weight of my house keys and my car key. I always, without fail, left them in the ceramic bowl on the kitchen counter. It was a ritual. Walk in, drop keys, take off shoes. Every single day for the 3 years I'd lived here, I had not put those keys in my pocket yesterday. I was 100% certain of it. I remember dropping them in the bowl when one got home from work. My blood ran cold. The relief of a moment ago vanished, sucked out of the room as if by a vacuum. It wasn't a hallucination. It was here. It was in this room. It smashed the window and punched through the door. And then it cleaned up. It fixed the door. It replaced the window. It gathered the broken glass. It tidied up its mess like a polite guest. And then, as a final, private little joke, it took my keys from the kitchen counter and slipped them into the pocket of my discarded jeans. It was a message. I can go anywhere. I can do anything. And I can erase all trace of it. I can make you think you're the one who's broken. The air in my lungs turned to poison. My eyes darted around the clean, sunlit room. It wasn't a sanctuary. It was a stage that had been reset for the next act. And the actor was still here. I dropped the clothes and backed out of the room, my movements stiff and robotic. My brain was a mess of static and pure, white-hot panic. I slammed the bedroom door shut again, the sound echoing my own frantic heartbeat. Where? I scanned the apartment. It was a small 2-bedroom. Living room, kitchen, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. It was in one of them. Hiding. Waiting. My first thought was the front door. Escape. I scrambled down the hall, my socked feet slipping on the hardwood floor. I reached the front door, my hands grabbing for the deadbolt. It was locked. The security chain was in place, exactly as I had left it. I hadn't gone out. And it hadn't gone out. It was locked in here with me. My gaze shot to the balcony door in the living room, my only other way out. I ran to it. The vertical bolt was shot deep into the frame. Locked. Secure. Trapped. I was trapped. My mind raced. The other bedroom? The small one I used for storage? The closet? Under my bed? Where are you? Where the fuck are you? And then I heard it. A sound that cut through the silence. A sound so mundane, so domestic, it was the most terrifying thing I had ever experienced. The gentle, steady rush of water. From the bathroom. Someone was in the bathroom. The shower was on. My breath hitched. My entire body went rigid. It wasn't hiding. It wasn't sneaking or cowering in a closet. It was taking a fucking shower. In my bathroom, using my water, my soap. The sheer brazen arrogance of it stole the air from my lungs. Every survival instinct I possessed screamed at me to run, to smash a window, to scream for help. But my feet were nailed to the floor. I couldn't move. I could only listen to the steady, rhythmic sound of the spray hitting the tiles. Fight. The word came from a deep, primal place I didn't know I had. Fight. My eyes scanned the room. The fireplace. The set of iron tools. Too clumsy. The kitchen. Knives. Too close. My eyes landed on the corner by the TV. My old aluminum baseball bat, a relic from a company softball league years ago. I crept toward it, each step a lifetime. My hand closed around the cool, worn grip. The weight of it was a comfort. A pathetic comfort, but it was something. I held it up, my knuckles white. I crept back toward the hallway, pressing myself against the wall. The sound of the shower continued, a steady, mocking hiss. I was a hunter in my own home. A terrified, trembling hunter. I waited. 1 minute, 5, 10. Each second was an agony. My arms started to ache from holding the bat. Sweat dripped down my forehead and into my eyes, stinging. Then, the sound changed. Squeak! The sound of the faucet being turned off. Silence. A deep, profound silence that was somehow worse than the noise. I held my breath. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. A few seconds passed. Then the drip, drip, drip of water from the shower head onto the floor of the tub. The bathroom door was just out of sight around the corner of the hallway. I couldn't see it from my position. Creak, the sound of the door opening. A slow, lazy sound. Not a frantic escape. Just someone stepping out of the shower. I flattened myself further against the wall, my heart about to explode out of my chest. This was it. It was coming out. I'd see it. I'd have to swing. But no footsteps followed. Just the silence. The dripping. And then, a voice. A voice that slid into my ear and turned my soul to ice. It was a voice I hadn't heard in 10 years. Not since the day I stood by her hospital bed. A voice I knew better than my own. It was my mother's voice. Perfect. Flawless. The same warm, gentle tone she used when I was a kid and had a nightmare. "Liam, honey?" The voice called out, soft and clear from the bathroom. "Can you get me a towel?" The sound hit me like a physical blow. Not the shower, not the dripping, not the creak of the door. The voice. My mother's voice. 10 years she'd been gone. 10 years since I'd last heard that specific, gentle warmth. A sound buried so deep in memory it was more of a feeling than a sound. And here it was, floating out of my goddamn bathroom as if she'd just stepped out of the tub. "Liam, honey? Can you get me a towel?" My grip on the aluminum bat went slack. My knuckles, white and bloodless a second ago, lost their tension. The bat suddenly felt impossibly heavy, a stupid piece of junk metal. My mind simply refused to process the information. It was a circuit breaker flipping in my skull, a complete system overload. It wasn't possible. Therefore, it wasn't happening. Logic fought against the panic clawing up my throat. It's a trick. It has to be a trick. It's him. It. Whatever had fixed my door, whatever had put my keys in my pocket, it was playing a game. A sick, twisted game with the pieces of my life. My mind latched onto that thought, a drowning man grabbing a piece of driftwood. It's a trick. It's a trick. It's a trick. I stayed flattened against the wall, my cheek pressed into the cool drywall. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. Maybe if I was silent enough, it would think I wasn't here. A stupid, childish thought. It knew I was here. It had been showering. It had fixed the window. It knew everything. The voice came again, a little closer this time, laced with the same patient concern she always used when I was being stubborn. "Liam, everything all right?" My heart hammered. A wild, frantic thing trapped in my ribs. I had to do something. The bat was useless. A direct confrontation was suicide. I didn't know what I was facing, but I knew what it wasn't. It wasn't my mother. My phone. The thought cut through the fog. My phone was in my pocket. My only connection to a world where mothers didn't come back from the dead to ask for a towel. My hand, shaking violently, slid down my side. I fumbled with the pocket of my jeans. The movement felt huge, clumsy, loud enough to echo through the apartment. My fingers closed around the cool glass and metal rectangle. Getting it out was a nightmare of coordination. My thumb trembled over the screen, smearing it with sweat. I almost dropped it twice. Who do I call? 911? What do I say? There's a thing in my bathroom that sounds like my dead mom? They'd send a psych team, not a SWAT team. Maya. Her name popped into my head. My ex. We hadn't talked in 3 months. Not since the ugly breakup, but she was a rock. Practical. No nonsense. She wouldn't ask questions. Not at first. I jabbed at her contact name. The message screen opened. My thumbs flew over the keyboard, clumsy and inaccurate. Back quote. Me, Maya, H-E-L-P, back quote. My finger hovered over the send button. Was this right? Dragging her into this? Before I could second guess it, a soft footstep padded on the hardwood floor just around the corner, in the hall. It was out of the bathroom. I jabbed the send button. The blue bubble appeared. Delivered. My eyes were glued to the corner of the wall, the edge of the hallway where it would appear. Any second now. I held my breath. The bat raised again. A pathetic ward against the impossible. Silence. Then, my phone buzzed in my hand. A reply. I glanced down, my heart seizing. Back quote. Maya, Liam. What the hell? It's 1 PM. Back quote. My thumbs were a blur. Back quote, me. Call the cops. Please. Tell them someone broke in. My address. Please, Maya. Back quote. The 3 dots appeared. She was typing. It felt like an eternity. Maya. Broke in. Are you drunk? We are SO not doing this again. This again was a reference to a stupid night 2 years ago, involving too much whiskey and a paranoid delusion about a raccoon on the fire escape. Me, not drunk. Not joking. In trouble. Please. The footsteps again. Closer. Slow. Deliberate. Exploring. It was in the living room now. The main space. Between me and the front door. Maya. Fine. Jesus. If this is a joke, I'm going to kill you. Calling now. A wave of something, not relief, but a less severe form of terror, washed over me. Help was coming. Real help. Not a ghost in my bathroom. Cops. With guns. All I had to do was survive until they got here. Stay hidden. Stay silent. I slid along the wall, away from the hallway entrance, deeper into the small dining nook that connected to the kitchen. My back hit the counter. I crouched down, tucking myself between the edge of the counter and a tall, leafy houseplant I'd been slowly killing for 6 months. I was hidden from the living room, but I had a clear line of sight to the front door. I listened. The soft padding continued for another minute, a lazy tour of my living room. I heard the faint creak of my favorite armchair as a weight settled into it. It was sitting down. In my chair. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. I could hear the faint, rhythmic sound of its breathing. Calm. Even. Then, there was another sound. A new one. Distant. A rhythmic, sharp rapping. Knock, knock, knock. The front door. My breathing stopped. Cops. Already? That was fast. A miracle. From the armchair in the living room, there was a soft sigh. A sound of annoyance. Then, the creak of the chair as the weight lifted. The soft footsteps started again, heading toward the sound. Heading for the front door. Police! A man's voice called from the hallway. Sharp. Authoritative. Mr. Collins, we received a call about a possible intruder. Are you in there? My God! They were here. The footsteps in my apartment stopped. It was standing right in front of the door, just waiting. What was it doing? Why wasn't it running? Panicking? It was trapped. I had to get to the door. I had to let them in before this thing did something. Pushing myself up, I grabbed the bat tighter and darted from behind the counter. I moved silently across the dining room floor, my socks making no noise on the wood. I peered around the edge of the wall. The living room was empty. The armchair was vacant. And the thing that had been in it was gone. My eyes shot to the front door. The peephole. I had to see. I crept forward, my heart a frantic bird against my ribs. I reached the door and pressed my eye to the cool metal of the peephole. The distorted fisheye lens showed the hallway outside. And in it stood 2 uniformed police officers. They were perfect. Blue uniforms, shiny badges, holstered guns on their hips. One was older, with graying hair and a stern expression. The other was younger, looking around the hallway impatiently. They were real. They were my salvation. Mr. Collins? The older one called again. I fumbled with the locks, my hands shaking with a new energy. The energy of hope. The deadbolt slid back with a loud thunk. The security chain jangled as I slid it free. My hand closed around the doorknob. I was safe. The nightmare was over. I pulled the door open, a hysterical sob of relief building in my chest. Oh, thank God, I started to say. The younger cop looked at me, and he smiled. It wasn't a reassuring smile. It was wide and thin and wrong. It didn't touch his eyes. His eyes were flat, dead, like pitted stones. He took a small step forward into the doorway. You shouldn't have called her. The voice wasn't his. It wasn't the voice of my mother. It was the other one, the one I'd heard before from my smart speaker. A glitchy, synthesized, electronic voice that scraped down my spine. The sound of a machine trying to imitate a man. It came from his smiling mouth, but it wasn't his. The world dissolved. The hallway, the cops, the apartment. It all fell away. This was the trap. This wasn't help. This was the threat. They had been outside all along, They had made me call, they had hurted me. My survival instinct screamed. The relief of a second ago curdled into pure, white-hot adrenaline. I threw my entire body weight into the door, trying to slam it shut. It was like pushing against a brick wall. The door jolted but didn't close. The younger cop's smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer annoyance. He pushed back, and the strength was absurd. I was a 180-pound man, and he moved me like I was a child. The wood of the door jamb groaned, then splintered. He and the older one flowed into the apartment. They didn't barge. They moved with a liquid efficiency. The bat was torn from my hands before I could even think to swing it. A hand grabbed a fistful of my shirt, twisting. The older cop slammed the door shut behind them, the click of the lock sounding like a death sentence. I thrashed, a wild animal in a snare. I aimed a knee, a fist, anything. It was useless. The younger one spun me around, his grip like steel. An arm wrapped around my neck, cutting off my air. I gagged, my feet kicking at empty space. The older one watched, his face impassive. "Calm down, Liam," he said, and his voice was normal, human. It was almost more terrifying. It's so much easier if you don't fight. My lungs burned. Black spots danced in my vision. I brought my hands up, clawing at the arm around my throat. The younger one just grunted and squeezed harder. I felt a sharp, brutal impact against the side of my head, just above my ear. Not a fist. Something hard. The butt of a gun, maybe. The world tilted on its axis. The sounds of the apartment, my own choking, their breathing, faded into a dull underwater roar. The light seemed to bend and warp. The floor rushed up to meet me. Then, nothing. Darkness. A thick, painless void. Light returned first. A dim, blurry awareness of the ceiling light in my living room. Then came the pain. A skull-splitting throb that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. My whole head felt like a bruised fruit. I tried to lift a hand to my temple and found I couldn't. My arms were pulled tight behind me. I blinked, my vision slowly swimming into focus. I was sitting upright. Slumped, but sitting. In one of my dining chairs. I was in the middle of my own living room. Rope. Or zip ties. They bit into the flesh of my wrists and my ankles, anchoring me to the chair. I was a prisoner in my own home, and they were still here. I heard a sound, a familiar sound. The crinkle of a foil bag, a sharp, loud crunch. I slowly, painfully lifted my head. My neck muscles screamed in protest. There they were, lounging on my couch. The two of them. They'd taken their police hats off, but they were still wearing the uniforms. The younger one, the one with the dead eyes, was holding my half-eaten bag of barbecue potato chips. He shoveled a handful into his mouth, crunching loudly, his eyes glued to the TV. The older one was leaning back, his head on my throw pillow, one arm draped casually over the back of the sofa. They were watching a sitcom. Canned laughter erupted from the speakers. My TV, my couch, my chips. The scene was so domestic, so mundane, it was the most terrifying thing I had ever witnessed. They weren't monsters cackling in the shadows. They were just here. They owned this space now. They owned me. The older one must have felt my gaze on him. He turned his head slowly, his expression bored. He looked at me, tied to the chair, bleeding and broken. There was no anger in his eyes, no malice, just a placid, terrifying emptiness. He offered me a small, dismissive smile. "See?" he said, his voice calm and reasonable. He gestured with his chin towards his partner, who let out another loud crunch. "Told you it'd be easier." He watched me for another moment, letting the reality of the situation sink in. The silent room, the stupid laughter from the television, the throbbing in my skull, the bite of the ties on my skin. He let the helplessness wash over me completely. Then, the younger one turned, wiping chip dust from his mouth onto his fake uniform pants. He looked at me, and that thin, wrong smile returned. "Don't look so scared," he said, his voice back to that horrible, glitched-out synth. "The game's just getting started." He paused, popping one more chip into his mouth. He chewed it slowly, deliberately, his dead eyes never leaving mine. "We're just the warm-up." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp as shattered glass. "We're just the warm-up." My brain, already screaming, tried to make sense of it. Warm-up? For what? My thoughts were a useless, frantic scramble. The pain in my head was a physical thing, a hot spike behind my eye. I tried to speak, to form a question, but my throat was a desert. All that came out was a dry, rasping sound. I strained against the zip ties. They bit deeper into my wrists, sending new waves of fire up my arms. "Money?" I finally managed to croak, the word tearing at my throat. It was the only logical thing, the only thing that made sense in a world that had stopped making any. "You want money? The cards are in my wallet. Take them. Take everything." The younger one, the one with the dead eyes, let out a short, sharp laugh that was completely without humor. He didn't even look at me. He just jammed another fistful of chips into his mouth, the crunching sound filling the room, an obscene counterpoint to the canned laughter still spilling from the TV. The older one was the one who answered. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone was patient, like he was explaining something simple to a child. "Oh, Liam, we don't want your money." He shifted on my couch, making himself more comfortable on my pillows. Then he pointed, a lazy, casual gesture with his chin. He pointed at the flat-screen TV. My eyes followed his gesture. At first, I saw nothing, just the flickering sitcom, the bright, stupid colors. Then I saw it. Tucked just under the manufacturer's logo, clinging to the black plastic frame like some high-tech parasite, a small, black square. And in the center of that square, a single, tiny, red light. It was on. It was recording. My blood went cold. A fresh wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't a robbery. Robbers don't set up cameras. What is that?" I whispered. The older cop looked from the camera back to me. His expression was one of mild disappointment, as if my confusion was somehow tiresome. He sighed and reached into his own uniform pocket, pulling out a smartphone. He tapped the screen a few times, then turned it so I could see. My own face stared back at me. It was me, right now, slumped in the dining chair, a trickle of dried blood matting the hair at my temple, my face a mask of terror and disbelief. The angle was from the TV. It was a live feed, and along the side of the screen, a river of text was flowing upwards at an impossible speed. Emojis, skulls, knives, laughing faces flew past, and next to a small, red icon of an eye, a number, 9,742. That many people were watching. My stomach dropped. The room seemed to tilt again. I was a spectator to my own torture, a player in a game I didn't know existed. The older cop watched my reaction, a flicker of something like satisfaction in his eyes. He leaned forward conspiratorially. "They like it when you're scared," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He nodded at the phone. "The numbers always go up when you look like that. When you beg. It's the best part." The world dissolved into a smear of noise and light, the chips crunching, the sitcom laughing, the red light on the camera, the number on the phone climbing, 9,815. It was all a show? The door, I breathed, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. The voice, my mother. The younger one finally looked away from the TV, a thin smile on his face. He spoke, and that awful, glitchy synth voice came out again. "Digital voice modulator. We sampled old home videos from your cloud account. Very sentimental. The shower?" My mind was grasping, trying to piece together the nightmare. "The footsteps? Bluetooth speaker in the bathroom vent," the older one said, leaning back again, all casual. "Small, powerful. We've been testing the tech. Your place was a perfect beta." He gestured around the apartment. "Isolated. Good acoustics. You were the perfect subject, Liam. Living all alone. No one to tell you you're not going crazy." He was ticking off the points of my terror like a project manager reviewing a successful launch. The fixed window lock. The keys in my pocket. The knocking on the door. It was all them. They hadn't just broken in. They had directed the entire night. They had built this cage of fear around me, brick by brick, and I hadn't even realized I was in it. They were the ghosts in my machine. They were the monsters. And thousands of people were watching. Paying to watch me break. The rage came then, hot and pure. It was a clean fire that burned through the fog of terror. It was useless, I knew that. I was tied to a chair. They had guns. But the humiliation, the sheer violation of it all, was too much. I threw my weight forward, the chair legs scraping hard against the wood floor. I roared, a raw, animal sound of pure fury. "You sons of bitches! I'll kill ya! I'll fucking kill you!" The younger one was on his feet in an instant. The bag of chips fell to the floor, scattering. The synth voice was gone, replaced by a low, angry growl. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his face a mask of fury. "Shut him up," the older one said from the couch, his voice still maddeningly calm. The younger one's hand flashed out, and a blade appeared in it. A switchblade, the click loud in the suddenly quiet room. He pressed the cold, flat side of the knife against my throat. The canned laughter from the TV seemed a million miles away. "Time for the main event anyway," the younger one hissed, his real voice low and gravelly. He leaned in close, his breath hot and sour. "The viewers have been voting for the last 10 minutes. A little poll. They like to participate." He pressed the edge of the blade just enough for me to feel its sharpness, a tiny line of fire on my skin. "And the winner is..." He paused for dramatic effect. "For the audience. The little piggy that cried all the way home." He grabbed my left hand, which was bound behind the chair. He yanked it, forcing the wrist into a brutal, unnatural angle. Pain shot up to my shoulder. With his other hand, he brought the knife down, poising the tip just over the knuckle of my pinky finger. My struggling stopped. My breath hitched. All the fight drained out of me, replaced by a cold, absolute dread. I stared at the glinting steel, at the focused, methodical look in his dead eyes. This was happening. This was real. The viewers had voted. "Don't look so scared," he whispered, the synth voice returning, a mocking parody of comfort. "It'll be quick." He raised the knife. I squeezed my eyes shut, a sob catching in my throat. I braced for the pain, for the shearing cut of the blade through flesh and bone. The world narrowed to that single point of contact, that impending agony. Click. The sound was small, unassuming, a light switch being flipped. And the world ended, not with a bang, with a sudden, total absence. The TV died. The canned laughter vanished mid-chuckle. The glow from the screen was gone. The phone in the older cop's hand went dark. The little red eye on the camera winked out of existence. Absolute black. Absolute silence. The only sounds left were the 3 of us breathing. My ragged, terrified gasps. The 2 of them suddenly sharp, confused intakes of air. The knife was no longer pressed against my finger. I could feel the younger one had recoiled, had straightened up in the darkness. "What the hell?" he grunted, his real voice back, laced with alarm. "Power grid?" "No," the older one said from the couch. His voice had lost its casual calm. It was tight, alert. "Just the unit." "A breaker flip?" I checked the box when we came in. "They're fine." A floorboard creaked as one of them took a step. They were disoriented. For the first time since this began. They weren't in complete control. The script had been thrown out. And then a new sound entered the room. It wasn't a voice. Not at first. It was a whisper. A dry, scraping whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. From the ceiling. From the floor. From the very walls of my apartment. It was a cold, ancient sound. A sound of dust and darkness and long-forgotten things. It was a sound that made the hairs on my arms stand on end, a primal fear that had nothing to do with knives or cameras. The whisper coiled in the blackness, and then it formed words. Slow. Deliberate. Each one a spike of ice driven into the silence. It wasn't the glitched synth voice. It wasn't my mother's voice. It was something else. Something that had been here long before me. And even in the pitch dark, I felt that the 2 men who had been my tormentors were now frozen, listening with the same skin-crawling horror that I was. The voice spoke. "Get." A pause. The word hung in the black air. "Out." Another pause. The silence stretched, thin and tight, of my house. The silence that followed was worse than the voice itself. It pressed in, thick and heavy, a physical weight in the pitch-black room. The only sound was the frantic drumming of blood in my ears, and the harsh, sharp breathing of the two men who, seconds ago, had been my tormentors. They were not in control anymore. The script was gone, the audience was gone. There was only the dark and that impossible, multi-toned whisper that had come from the walls themselves. A beam of light suddenly slashed through the blackness, blindingly bright. It came from a phone. The older intruder was on his feet, his calm demeanor shattered. The beam jittered, his hand shaking as it swept across the dining table, the floor, the opposite wall. It found nothing, just my apartment, unplugged and inert. "What the hell was that?" the younger one hissed. His voice was raw, stripped of its digital mockery. Another beam of light joined the first, his own phone's flashlight cutting a nervous path through the dark. "Is that a friend of yours? You got someone else here?" His light pinned me to the chair. I could only shake my head, a tiny, useless movement. The zip ties were still biting into my wrists. My terror of them was being rapidly overwritten by a new, deeper dread, a dread they now shared. "There's no one else here," the older one snapped, his voice tight. I swept the whole place. Closets, under the bed. "It's a one-bedroom apartment." He was trying to reassure himself, his logic a flimsy shield against the impossible. Scrape. The sound was tiny. So small it was almost lost beneath their panicked whispers. The sound of ceramic sliding on polished wood. Both flashlight beams snapped toward the sound. They landed on the small dining table. On a coffee mug, my favorite, a chipped blue one, that was sitting near the edge, it moved again, just a quarter of an inch. A slow, deliberate slide toward the center of the table, as if nudged by an unseen finger. The younger man made a choked sound in the back of his throat. "Did you see that?" "I saw it," the older one breathed. He took a hesitant step closer, his light fixed on the mug. Tectonic shift. An aftershock. "This building is old." His voice was a lie. We all knew it. The sheer desperation in his tone confirmed it. Click. The sound was soft, magnetic. It came from the kitchen area. Whir. Both beams swung violently to the left. The door of my stainless steel refrigerator was slowly swinging open. A soft, pale light spilled out, illuminating the cartons of milk and old takeout containers inside. It swung until it was wide open, then stopped with a gentle bump. Silence. "Okay," the younger one said, his voice trembling. "That is not a fucking aftershock." They were backing away now, 2 pairs of feet shuffling on the hardwood floor. They were moving toward the center of the room, away from the kitchen, away from the table, away from the walls. They were creating a small island of perceived safety in the middle of my living room, their flashlight beams darting around like panicked birds. The older one was still trying to rationalize it, to fit it into his world of tech and deception. "It's a hack. Someone else is in the system. They cut our feed and took over." He turned his light back on me, his eyes wild behind the glare. "Who are you, Liam? Who did you piss off?" Before I could answer, before I could even form a thought, the younger one screamed. It wasn't a word. It was a pure, high-pitched shriek of animal terror. His flashlight beam was fixed on the far corner of the room, the one near the window. I tried to open what felt like a lifetime ago. The older one's beam shot to the same spot. I twisted in my chair, the plastic biting into my back, trying to see what they were seeing. The corner was dark. But it was a different kind of dark. The flashlight beams didn't illuminate it. They seemed to bend into it, to be swallowed by it. It was a patch of absolute nothing. A hole punched through the reality of my apartment. And it was growing. It wasn't rising from the floor or seeping from the walls. It was just congealing, gaining mass from the shadows themselves. It coalesced into a shape. A tall, thin shape, vaguely human, but with proportions that were all wrong. Too long in the arms. Too thin in the torso. It had no features, no clothes, no substance. It was just an absence. A man-shaped void. The two intruders stood frozen. The architects of my fear, the men who had orchestrated every second of my night, were now staring at something they hadn't planned, something that wasn't in their toolkit. They had knocked on the door of the wrong house. They hadn't just broken into my home, they had trespassed into its home. The realization was plain on their faces, lit by the trembling glow of their phones. They were no longer the showrunners. They were just part of the cast. And the show was over. The shadow moved. It didn't run. It didn't walk. It flowed across the floor, a current of pure black, silent and impossibly fast. It moved toward the younger man. He didn't have time to do anything but widen his eyes. His scream was cut short as the shape hit him. There was no sound of impact, just a sudden rush of cold air that I felt, even from my chair. He was lifted off his feet, his body flying backward, as if thrown by a speeding truck. T-amp. The sound was wet and final. He hit the wall next to the TV, the drywall cracking under the force. His phone clattered to the floor, its lights spinning crazily before settling on the ceiling. He slid down the wall, a boneless puppet with its strings cut, and landed in a heap. He didn't move. The older intruder stared, his mouth hanging open. The tactical calm, the smug superiority, the casual cruelty, all of it was gone, burned away by raw, primal fear. He looked from the motionless heap of his partner to the shadow now standing still in the center of the room, and then his eyes locked onto mine. Something broke in his face. It was the frantic, desperate look of a cornered animal. Survival. That was the only thing left. He lunged toward me. For a split second, I thought he was going to finish the job, to silence the only witness. But his hand wasn't going for my throat. It was going for my hands, bound behind the chair. The switchblade clicked open. The same blade he was going to take my finger with. Ziz, 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 Z-I-T. The sharp edge sliced through the plastic of the zip ties. My hands were free. The sudden rush of blood into them was a wave of pins and needles. "Go," he hissed, his voice a ragged gasp. He grabbed my arm, yanking me out of the chair. "The door! Run!" My brain couldn't process the shift. One moment, this man was my captor. The next, he was my only ally. But my body didn't need to understand. It just responded. We scrambled, two terrified men tripping over each other in the dark, driven by the same instinct. The only light was from the fallen phone on the other side of the room, casting long, distorted shadows. His hand was on my back, shoving me forward. "Move! Move!" We reached the front door. He fumbled with the locks, his hands shaking so badly he could barely turn the deadbolt. I stood beside him, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest, my eyes glued to the center of the room where the shadow had been. It was gone. Click. The deadbolt unlocked. Clack. He threw the knob lock, he yanked the door open, and a sliver of yellowish hallway light sliced into the apartment. Freedom. Safety. The hallway of my building never looked so beautiful. We both lunged for the opening. And stopped dead. It was there. The shadow was standing in the doorway, blocking our escape. It filled the entire frame. We weren't looking at a vague shape in a dark corner anymore. We were face to face with it. There was no face. Where a face should be, there was just that same consuming void, a pit of nothingness that seemed to pull at the light, to pull at the air. It was a complete and total emptiness. It raised an arm, a long, thin limb of cohesive darkness. The gesture was slow, deliberate, unstoppable. And it wasn't reaching for me. It was reaching for the man beside me. The man whose phone had filmed my terror. The man who had held a knife to my finger. He made a sound. A low, guttural whimper. He took a stumbling step backward, away from the door, away from the thing. He was retreating back into the apartment he had so desperately tried to flee. And in that final, horrifying second, the truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. A cold, clear, devastating clarity. The voice. The moving objects. The power cut. None of it was for me. I was never the target. I was the cheese in the trap. The whispers from the walls were not a warning to me, but a judgment on them. The house wasn't haunted for me, it was just haunted. And tonight 2 men had kicked down its door, set up their cameras, and started a loud, violent show. They had woken something up. This ancient, silent anger, this thing made of shadow and emptiness, hadn't cared about me living here for the past 3 years. But it cared, with a terrible and absolute finality, about the men who had violated its sanctuary, It had been waiting. The shadow's hand-like appendage drifted forward, brushing the intruder's shoulder. He didn't scream. The sound was sucked out of him. His body went rigid, his eyes bugged out, fixed on the nothingness before him. Then he simply faded. His color drained away, his form wavered like a heat haze, and he was pulled, particle by particle, into the void of the shadow's body. There was no blood, no violence, just a quiet, horrifying absorption. In a few seconds, he was gone. The shadow stood in the doorway for a moment longer. The hallway light behind it seemed to bend, to shrink. Then, it too dissolved, seeping back into the doorframe, into the walls, into the very bones of the building, leaving me alone. In the sudden, complete silence, standing in my open doorway. Free. I didn't think. I ran. My bare feet slapped against the cheap laminate of the hallway, a frantic, percussive sound that echoed the ragged explosion in my chest. Left. Right. The door to the stairwell. I slammed my palm against the push bar and plunged into the concrete throat of the building. The air was different in here. Colder. It smelled of dust and stale urine. My footsteps changed their rhythm, a brutal slap, slap, slap that cannonballed down the empty shaft. Each landing was a sharp, desperate turn. I didn't dare touch the railing, slick with the grime of years. I didn't dare look back. Looking back was an invitation. I could feel the open door of my apartment, a wound in the building, 5 floors above me. I could feel the silence that had swallowed the shadow. That silence was chasing me now. My lungs were on fire. A sharp, acidic burn that tasted like metal and fear. My legs were screaming, muscles seizing from the sudden, violent exertion, after being bound for what felt like an eternity. I didn't care. Pain was good. Pain meant I was still moving. Pain meant I was alive. 4 floors. 3. The numbers stenciled on the wall blurred past. The sound of my own harsh breathing filled my ears, a loud, ugly thing. I was an animal, fleeing a fire it couldn't comprehend. 2. 1. The ground floor door flew open under my weight, and I was out, spilling into the lobby. The bored-looking security guard I saw every night wasn't at his desk. The desk was empty. The TV monitor showing the lobby camera was just static. A quiet hum filled the space, the sound of broken technology. He was never here this late. The thought hit me like a splash of ice water, but I couldn't stop. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and hit the night air. It was real. The air. It was cold and damp, thick with the smell of wet pavement and exhaust fumes. A siren wailed somewhere in the distance. The sounds of the city. Normal sounds. I ran, not on a specific path, just away. Away from the brick facade of my building, away from that 5th floor window where the lights were still out. Streetlights smeared past in a yellow-orange blur. I crossed the street without looking, earning a long, angry horn blast from a taxi that swerved around me. I didn't even flinch. The driver's anger was nothing. It was a human emotion. It was safe. Finally, my body betrayed me. A cramp seized my side, a hot poker driving into my ribs. I staggered, breath coming in wheezing sobs, and ducked into the first dark space I saw. An alley between a laundromat and a shuttered butcher shop. It smelled of garbage and old grease. I leaned against the cold, damp brick, my body sliding down the wall until I was crouched on the ground, head between my knees, fighting not to throw up. I stayed like that for a long time, just breathing, listening to the city hum around me, proving to myself that the world was still here. When my heart finally stopped trying to beat its way out of my throat, I became aware of my hand, my right hand. It was clenched into a fist, so tight the knuckles were white. It was clutching something hard, rectangular, and cold. I uncurled my fingers, wincing at the stiffness. It was a phone, not my phone. My phone was on the kitchen counter, dead. This one was black, sleek, heavier. His phone, the older one. The one who cut me free, the one who was absorbed into nothing. In the chaos, in the blind scramble for the door, my hand must have closed around it. I must have ripped it from his grip as we fell over each other. A useless, accidental souvenir from hell. My thumb brushed the screen. It lit up. The screen wasn't locked. It was open to a single application, a simple Notes app. At the top was a file name, Project Nightingale, Phase 2. My blood went cold. Slower this time. A creeping, dreadful chill. Below the title was a photo. My photo. The one from my company ID badge, an awkward, smiling picture I hated. Underneath it was a list. A bullet-pointed dissection of my life. Liam Edwards, 28. Data analyst, Viridian Solutions. Apartment 5B, 437 W 24th Street. Lease renewed 4 months ago. Schedule. Leaves for work 8:15 a.m. Return 6:30 to 7 p.m. Jim Mon/Wed Free Social Circle Limited. Primarily interacts with Mark, see attached social media profile, and Sarah, sister, lives in Oregon. Habits. Orders takeout most weeknights. Listens to true crime podcasts. Drinks too much coffee. Sleeps with window slightly ajar, even in winter. I read it over and over. They knew everything. They knew what time I left for work. They knew I talked to my sister. They even knew I left the damn window open. It was a violation so profound it made my skin crawl. This wasn't a random break-in. This was a hunt. My eyes scrolled down, past the meticulous, horrifying details of my own boring life. I reached the end of the file. There was one final entry, dated last week. It was highlighted in yellow. Note: Target acquired an antique item from the Chelsea flea market on Sunday. Small, wooden, possible music box. This is a perfect catalyst. Proceed with Phase 1, psychological intimidation via simulated paranormal phenomena. Reconfirm gear. Sound emitters, remote lighting control, voice modulator all tested. Begin operation next week. Simulated paranormal phenomena. The words didn't make sense. My mind rejected them. Simulated? I saw a man get thrown across the room like a rag doll. I saw another man get eaten by a shadow. That wasn't a sound emitter. That wasn't a trick of the light. And then another piece clicked into place, a piece I hadn't even known was missing. The Chelsea flea market. The memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp. A cold, bright Sunday 2 weeks ago. I was just killing time. A stall near the back, run by an old man with cloudy eyes and a tremor in his hands. It was filled with junk. Old lamps, rusted tools, tarnished silverware. And on a dirty velvet cloth, a small wooden box, intricately carved with leaves and vines. It was old. The wood was dark and smooth. I bought it for $10. A stupid, impulsive purchase. What did I do with it? Say, I brought it home. I tried to open it, but it was stuck. The little winding key on the bottom wouldn't turn. It didn't play any music. It was just a box. I got bored with it after 5 minutes. I tossed it into the back of my bedroom closet, on top of a stack of old shoeboxes. I forgot it was even there. A horrible, bone-deep understanding washed over me, so cold and so absolute it was like drowning. The entity was real. It wasn't the house. It was never the house. It was the box. A gritty, dirty little supernatural landmine I had bought for $10 and brought into my home. It had been dormant, sleeping, just an old, silent thing in the back of my closet. Until tonight. Tonight, 2 men broke into my apartment. They set up their gear. They cut the power. They started their show. They started whispering from the walls, moving mugs with hidden wires, opening the fridge with some remote device. They were faking a haunting. They were banging on the cage of something they didn't even know was there. They weren't the predators. They were the idiots who threw rocks at a hornet's nest to scare a cat. And the nest had broken open. The voice from the walls. The real one. It wasn't for me. It was for them. The anger wasn't directed at the resident. It was directed at the trespassers. The mimics. The ones who had so crudely and loudly mocked its own silent existence. I wasn't the target. I was the bait. I was the stage where this cosmic joke played out. My stomach heaved. I leaned forward and retched onto the grimy asphalt. Nothing came up but bitter bile. I pushed myself up, my legs shaking. The phone was still in my hand. Its screen was a pale, accusatory light in the darkness of the alley. I had to get away. I had to call the police. I had to tell someone. What would I tell them? That my kidnappers got eaten by a ghost I accidentally brought home from a flea market? They would lock me in a padded room. My thumb trembled as I went to close the Notes app, but the phone did it for me. The screen flickered. The Notes app vanished. For a second, the screen went black. Then it flickered again. and a new image appeared. It was the camera, the front-facing camera. Staring back at me was my own face, pale, streaked with sweat, eyes wide, and animal wild. The screen's weak light cast deep shadows under my eyes, in the hollows of my cheeks. I looked like a ghost. I stared at my reflection, at the proof that I was still here, still solid. And then I saw it. It was there for only a fraction of a second, a glitch in the image, a flicker of pixels behind my head. In the reflection on the screen, something stood behind me, a shape. Tall, thin, a man-shaped void of absolute blackness, featureless and empty. It was hunched over, its formless head right beside mine, peering into the phone's camera along with me. Its long, impossible arm was draped over my shoulder. I didn't even scream. The sound died in my throat. I whipped my head around. Nothing. Just a brick wall, slick with condensation, tagged with a faded splash of red graffiti. The alley was empty. My eyes snapped back to the phone. The image was normal again. It was just me, alone in the alley, staring wild-eyed into the screen. But I saw it. I knew I saw it. It hadn't been waiting in the apartment. It hadn't been tied to the house. It was tied to the box. And when its sanctum was violated, when it was woken up by noise and violence, it hadn't gone back to sleep. It had followed me out the door. It had latched on. The trap hadn't been for them. It was for me. I was the one who brought it home. I was the new house. The alley spat me out onto the street. My feet were raw. My lungs felt like they had been scoured with steel wool. I threw the phone. It spun through the air, a dark rectangle against the orange city glow, and clattered into a sewer grate. Gone. Good. I couldn't go back to my apartment. I couldn't call the police. The very idea was insane. What would I say? My kidnappers were eaten by a ghost I bought at a flea market? They'd put me in a jacket that ties in the back. One name surfaced in the sludge of my panic. Mark. Mark was my only real friend in this city. He lived 20 blocks north in a shithole fifth-floor walk-up near the university, a place that always smelled of stale beer and instant noodles. It was perfect. It wasn't my home. It wasn't the place where reality had torn apart. I ran. It wasn't a frantic sprint anymore. It was a shambling, painful jog. Every car that passed, I flinched. Every shadow that stretched too long, my heart tried to climb up my throat. I kept my head down, a walking ghost on the empty late-night sidewalks of New York. I felt 1,000 pairs of eyes on me, from darkened windows, from alleyways, from the sky itself. I was a bug under a magnifying glass. I buzzed his apartment. A long, desperate press of the button. A crackle of static, then his voice, thick with sleep. Yeah? Mark, it's me. Liam, let me in. Liam? What the hell, man? It's like 3 in the morning. Please, Mark, just... please. A long pause. The sound of a groan. The loud, electric buzz of the door lock releasing. I pushed inside and began the long climb up the stairs. Each step was a lifetime. The building was old. The air was thick with the lives of 100 other people. It was a good sound, a good smell, the smell of life. He was waiting at his open door, wearing nothing but boxers, his hair a mess. He looked confused, then his eyes took in the state of me. The bare feet, the sweaty, grime-streaked face, the wild stare. Jesus Christ, Liam, what happened to you? You look like you saw a ghost. The words hit me like a physical blow. I pushed past him into the apartment, my body shaking so hard, my teeth chattered. Lock the door, I managed to say. Lock it. He did, his brow furrowed with concern. Okay, it's locked. Talk to me. Did you get mugged? I sank onto his lumpy couch, the worn fabric scratching my skin. I tried to tell him. The words came out in a torrent, a jumbled mess of shadows and whispers, of men in my apartment and a phone and a note about Project Nightingale. I told him about the box. I told him what I saw happen to them. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He just stood there, his arms crossed, a look of profound pity on his face. When I finally ran out of words, my throat raw, he went to his tiny kitchen and came back with a glass of water and a shot of whiskey. Here, he said, pushing the whiskey into my hand. Drink this. All of it. I did. It burned a hot trail down to my stomach. "Liam," he said, sitting in the armchair opposite me. His voice was gentle, the kind you use on a scared animal. "You've been through something fucked up, okay? Someone broke into your place. That's real. That's terrifying. Your mind, it's trying to make sense of it. It's filling in the blanks with stuff from those podcasts you listen to." "It was real, Mark." "I know it felt real," he said. "That's what shock does. It makes things feel real. A shadow can look like a monster when your adrenaline is pumping. A power surge can sound like a voice." He thought I was crazy. A part of me screamed at him, wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him until he understood. But another, deeper part of me was just tired. Too tired to argue. I just nodded. "You can crash here," he said, gesturing to the couch. "Take as long as you need. We'll go to the cops in the morning. We'll file a report. A break-in. Simple." He went back to his bedroom and came out with a pillow and a thin blanket. He tossed them on the couch. "Get some sleep, man. It'll look different in the morning." He paused at his bedroom door. "And for what it's worth, I'm glad you're okay." Then he shut the door, and I was alone again. Silence. Not the predatory silence of my apartment. This was a normal city silence, punctuated by a distant siren, the rumble of the subway deep underground, the hum of Mark's old refrigerator. I lay on the couch, pulling the thin blanket up to my chin. I was safe. I told myself that over and over. I was safe. But I didn't close my eyes. I stared at the ceiling, at the water stains that looked like an old map of a country that didn't exist. I listened. I waited. For what, I didn't know. Sleep was a country I could not enter. Every time I got close, the image of that thing in the phone's reflection would flash behind my eyelids. The formless head next to mine. The impossible arm over my shoulder. I must have drifted. Not slept, but hovered in a gray space between thought and dream. And that's when I heard it. It was faint. So faint I thought it was the siren again, echoing from a dozen blocks away. A tiny, tinny melody. Plink. Plonk. Plink. Plink. Plonk. My eyes snapped open, my heart seized. I knew that melody. It was the hesitant, broken sound of a music box that can't quite catch its rhythm. I sat bolt upright. The blanket fell to the floor. The sound was in the room with me. Faint, but it was here. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the floor, near the door. From my jacket. The one I'd thrown on the floor when I came in. No, it was impossible. I hadn't gone back for anything. I didn't pack a bag. I just ran. I ran with nothing but the clothes on my back. My hands were shaking as I reached for the jacket. It was a cheap windbreaker, its pockets usually empty except for lint and a stray receipt. I slid my hand into the right pocket. My fingers brushed against something hard. Wooden. Cold. I pulled it out. The box. The small, intricately carved wooden box. It was sitting in the palm of my hand. Its tiny gears turning. Its little metal cylinder plinking out that broken, horrifying tune all by itself. How? The question was a physical scream in my mind. How was it here? Did I grab it? In the chaos, in that blind scramble for the door, did my hand, the same hand that grabbed the phone, also scoop this up from the closet floor? I didn't remember. I didn't remember anything but fear. My throat was tight. The air was thick. I had to get it out. I scrambled to the window, my bare feet cold on the dusty floorboards. I fumbled with the latch, my fingers suddenly slick and useless. The old window groaned in protest as I forced it up. The night air rushed in, cold and tasting of rain. I held the box out over the dark chasm of the alley 5 floors below. Then, with a strangled cry, I let it go. It fell. I watched it, a small, dark shape tumbling through the air, until it disappeared into the blackness. I waited. A second later, I heard it, a faint, distant crack as it shattered on the concrete below. Gone. I slammed the window shut, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass, my whole body trembling with a sick relief. It was over. The physical object was gone. It was destroyed. I stood there for a long moment, just breathing. In, out, plink, plonk, plink, plink, plonk. The sound didn't stop. My blood ran cold, slower this time. A creeping, dreadful frost that started in my marrow and spread outwards. I whipped my head around. The room was empty. The sound wasn't in the room anymore. It was in my head. A perfect, clear phantom melody playing on a loop right between my ears. It was louder now that the physical source was gone, sharper. I clapped my hands over my ears, pressing until it hurt. It did nothing. The music was inside. I was the music box now. And then another sound joined it. A whisper, woven into the notes. It wasn't the deep, guttural voice from my apartment. This was different, thinner, a rasp of dry leaves. It was urgent, frightened. Not me. The whisper coiled in my skull. Not me. My legs gave out and I slid down the wall to the floor, my hands still clamped to the sides of my head as if I could physically block it. Warning, the whisper hissed, tangled in the tinny music. Warning you. It was the ghost from the box. The original victim. The one the intruders had mocked. It wasn't the predator. It was trying to tell me something. It was trying to warn me about the other thing. The thing from the phone. The thing that had followed me. The door to the bedroom creaked open. I looked up. Mark stood in the doorway, scrubbing a hand over his face. The light from the hall silhouetted him. Liam, what is all that noise? He mumbled, his voice gravelly. Are you okay? What are you doing on the floor? He took a step into the living room. His eyes adjusted to the dim light from the window. He looked at me, crouched against the wall, a mess of pure terror. His expression was a mixture of annoyance and worry. Jesus, man, he started to say. You really need to. He stopped. Mid-word, mid-breath, his eyes were fixed on me. No, not on me. Over me. Behind me. The annoyance on his face evaporated. The sleepiness vanished. His jaw went slack. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, gray-white in the gloom. His eyes grew wide, then wider, two perfect circles of disbelief and stark animal fear. His hand, the one he had been rubbing his face with, rose slowly, his finger trembling as he pointed at the space right behind my head. Elma Goodwood, he stammered, his voice a choked, strangled thing. It was a sound I had never heard a human being make before. Behind you? What is that? Behind you. I didn't want to. Every instinct, every cell in my body screamed at me not to. Stay still. Don't look. Don't acknowledge it. If you don't see it, it's not real. But I had to. I couldn't not look. I turned my head. Slowly. The sound of my neck creaking was like a gunshot in the silent room. It was there. It was in the room with us. It stood in the space where I had just been standing. It was no longer a flicker on a screen. It wasn't a glitch of light and pixels. It was solid. A tall, thin shape made of absolute nothing. It was taller than the doorframe, its head bent slightly to fit in the room. It absorbed the dim light from the window, creating a man-shaped hole in the world. It had no face, no features, nothing but a deep, final blackness. It felt the shift in the room. It felt my gaze. It felt Mark's terror. The formless void of its head swiveled, a slow, deliberate motion. It wasn't looking at me. I was the old house. I was the stage. It had a new audience. It was looking straight at Mark. Mark's scream was not a word. It was a sound stripped of all language, a high, thin cord of animal terror that unwound from his throat and filled the small apartment. He scrambled backwards, his bare feet slipping on the dusty floorboards, his body crab walking away from me, away from the thing that stood behind me. His eyes were wide, white, and locked on it. He didn't look at me again. He couldn't. He hit the wall of his bedroom, fumbled blindly for the doorknob, twisted it. The door flew open and he fell inside, slamming it shut with a crash that shook the walls. I heard the click of the lock, then another. He was trying to barricade himself in. The silence that followed was worse than the scream. The thing didn't move. It didn't follow him. Its attention, its entire immense, silent presence, remained fixed on me. It was my keeper. Mark was just a distraction. The music in my head changed. The hesitant, broken melody of the music box was gone. Now it was a frantic, non-stop loop. Plink, plonk, plink, plink, plonk, plink, plonk, plink. It was a high-speed warning, a frantic telegraph clicking out a single message over and over. Danger, danger, danger. My hands flew to my ears, pressing hard. But the sound wasn't coming from outside. The music was in my skull, a tiny, maddening engine of fear. It was the whisper's desperate alarm. Warning you. I stayed on the floor, my back pressed against the wall, my legs trembling too hard to stand. I couldn't take my eyes off the shape. It was a tear in the world, a man-shaped hole that led to nowhere. Light didn't reflect off it. Light died on it. The dim glow from the window seemed to bend inwards at its edges, consumed. It wasn't attacking. It just stood there, a silent black monolith in the center of the room. It was waiting. But for what? Then I saw it. It wasn't my eyes that saw it first. It was a deeper sense. The room was getting darker. Not just dimmer, but smaller. The corners of the ceiling, the space under Mark's couch, the shadows in the hallway. They were all growing deeper, stretching towards the central figure like iron filings to a magnet. The thing wasn't moving. It was expanding. It was feeding on the room itself, on the light, on the space, on the fear. My breath hitched. The warning. The music box. It wasn't the monster. It was the cage. A tiny, fragile cage for this. Or maybe it was a bell. A fire alarm. And when the men in my apartment came, they didn't just come for me. They mocked the alarm, they taunted the prisoner inside, and then they woke up the warden. The thing from the phone. The thing that came when you got its attention. Project Nightingale. I had brought the bell here. I had smashed it. And in doing so, I hadn't destroyed the threat. I had just silenced the only warning I had. I was alone with it now. Completely and utterly alone. Bang, bang, bang. A fist hammered on the apartment door, making me jolt so hard I bit my tongue. Mark? You okay in there? What the hell was that scream? A man's voice yelled from the hallway. I couldn't answer. My throat was a knot of stone. The thing in the room didn't react. It was as if the door, the voice, the entire world outside this space did not exist. Bang, 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 louder this time, more urgent. Hey, open up! This is the super! Somebody called about a scream. My mind screamed. No! Stay away! Go! But the words wouldn't come out. There was a jangle of keys, a metallic scrape in the lock. The deadbolt turned with a loud, final thunk. The door swung inward, hitting the wall with a crack. A heavy-set man in a gray sweatshirt stood there, a ring of keys in his hand. Behind him, a young woman in pajamas peered nervously over his shoulder, her phone clutched in her hand. A third person, a skinny guy with glasses, was visible further down the hall. The super's eyes swept the room. They saw me, a trembling heap on the floor. They saw the slammed bedroom door. His face hardened with annoyance. What's going on here? Where's Mark? He took a step inside. The woman followed, her eyes wide. And then they saw it. The super stopped dead. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The keys slipped from his hand and fell to the floor with a soft metallic clatter. The woman behind him made a small, gasping sound, like she was trying to suck all the air out of the hallway. The guy in the back just vanished. Smart. They saw the impossible shape standing in the middle of the room. They saw the hole in reality. And the thing felt their eyes on it. I saw it happen. It was like a ripple across a surface of still, black water. The utter stillness it held was broken. The edges of its form seemed to soften, to churn. It wasn't growing anymore. It was shifting. It was enjoying this. The new audience. The fresh terror. The super's stunned silence and the woman's sharp, panicked breaths were like a delicacy, a new flavor after the monotonous meal of my own fear. A low hum started to fill the room, a deep electronic vibration that I could feel in the floorboards and in my teeth. The thing's head, the featureless void at the top of its long frame, tilted. Not towards me. Not anymore. It tilted towards the door, towards them, and then it came apart. It wasn't a violent tear. It was a slow, sickening bleed. From the center of the main dark mass, a smaller tendril of shadow detached itself. It dripped to the floor like hot tar, pooling for a second before it rose. It formed a new shape, shorter, hunched, a four-legged thing made of pure blackness. It crawled, silent and fluid, across the wood floorboards. It moved towards the super. The man's paralysis broke. He let out a wet, choked cry and stumbled backwards, tripping over his own feet and crashing into the woman. Another piece of the main shadow peeled away. This one was thin, serpentine. It slithered up the wall, defying gravity, its formless head turning left and right, tasting the air. It flowed across the ceiling. Then another. And another. The one tall shadow was birthing a dozen smaller nightmares. They poured from it, taking different shapes. Some vaguely human, some bestial, some just crawling amorphous blobs of night. The large, silent monolith was a nest, a queen. And I was the anchor that had dragged it into this hive. The room erupted. The super screamed again, a real scream this time, as the four-legged shadow scrambled up his leg. He kicked wildly, trying to shake it off, but it clung to him, its darkness spreading over his jeans like a wet stain. The woman shrieked, a piercing sound that lanced through the air, as the thing on the ceiling dropped down in front of her, dangling by a thread of blackness. She turned to run, but another shadow, one that had crawled from under the couch, coiled around her ankles, and she went down hard. They swarmed. They weren't killing them. Not yet. They were playing. They flowed over their victims, silent, cold, absorbing the panicked screams, drinking in the thrashing terror. The hum in the room grew louder, a triumphant, resonant thrum of satisfaction. I was invisible. I was irrelevant. I was just the fixture to which the horror was attached. They didn't touch me. They flowed around me, ignoring me as they swarmed the two struggling figures by the door. My eyes darted around, looking for an escape that didn't exist. My gaze fell on the dark, reflective surface of the antique wardrobe against the far wall, and I saw it. I saw the whole scene, reflected in the dark wood. I saw the writhing smaller shadows covering the two people on the floor. I saw my own pathetic form, crouched against the wall, mouth agape. And I saw the thing behind me. The original shadow. The tall, man-shaped void. It had never moved. It was still standing right behind me, its form diminished but solid. It was the parent, watching its children feed. It was still tethered to me, a permanent passenger latched onto my soul. But in the reflection, I could see something I couldn't see with my own eyes. Inside the absolute blackness of its form, the dark wood of the wardrobe acted like a black mirror, revealing a different layer. Within the shadow's shape, faint and distorted as if seen through deep, murky water, were faces. Dozens of them. They were pale, stretched, their mouths open in silent, unending screams. Men, women, their features twisted in agony, their eyes wide, with a horror that would never end. They were trapped inside it, swirling slowly in that abyss of a body, their identities consumed, their last moments of terror, captured and replayed for eternity. They were its trophies, its collection. My eyes met the eyes of one of the faces, a woman with short hair. Her ethereal form pressed against the invisible wall of her prison, her silent scream directed right at me, a new face for the collection. She was looking at me. They were all looking at me, pleading, wailing. And I knew with a certainty that was colder and sharper than any fear I had ever felt. There was a space inside there, waiting for me. The high, thin wail of the woman cut through the room, a sound so sharp it was like a razor against my eardrums. It mixed with the super's guttural cry, a wet, panicked noise of a man who had never seen anything that didn't fit into his world of leaky pipes and busted locks. They scrambled backwards, a tangle of limbs, a frantic crab walk of pure animal retreat. They were trying to get out into the hallway, away from the nest they had stumbled into. The children of the shadow followed. They did not run, they flowed. The four-legged thing, the one that had climbed the super's leg, scuttled after them with an unnatural speed, its non-body hugging the floor. The serpentine horror that had dropped from the ceiling slithered through the doorway, a ribbon of moving night. Blobs and tendrils of animate darkness poured from my apartment, ignoring me completely, their focus locked on the fresh new terror filling the corridor outside. There were more screams from the hallway, not just theirs. Another voice. The skinny guy with glasses, maybe? The sounds were a chaotic symphony of panic. A thud, a shriek, a door slamming somewhere down the hall, the frantic pounding of fists on wood. They were running, spreading the fear. The swarm was carrying the horror outwards, and then, just as quickly as it began, the sound receded. It grew distant, muffled by walls and distance. The frantic energy bled out of my immediate vicinity, leaving a vacuum in its wake. There was no more screaming in my ears, no more thrashing bodies on my floor. The apartment was quiet. He and I were alone again. The music in my head, the high-speed frantic telegraph of danger, danger, danger that had been hammering my skull into a pulp, stopped. It didn't fade. It didn't wind down. It just cut out. One moment it was there, the next, it was gone. The sudden, absolute silence in my mind was more shocking than the noise had been. It was like a lifeline being cut. The alarm was off. Not because the danger was gone, but because the alarm was broken, or because the one ringing it had given up. I was still on the floor, my back against the wall, my heart hammering a rhythm against my ribs that seemed loud enough to shake the room. I risked a glance at the wardrobe. The reflection was still there, the tall, man-shaped hole in the world standing right behind me. The faces inside it still swirled, their silent screams still aimed at me. Then the reflection wavered. The world went dark. Not the room. My mind. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a memory. It was an image, clear and sharp and cold, pushed directly into the center of my brain. A little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7. She had a blue dress with a white lace collar. Her dark hair was in 2 braids. She was on her knees in a bedroom filled with old, heavy furniture. Sunlight streamed through a high window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. In her small hands, she clutched a wooden music box, holding it to her chest like a shield. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, locked on something in front of her, something I couldn't see. The image shifted. Now I was seeing the room from behind her. She was just a small shape in the dim light. And from the deepest corner of the room, where the shadows were thickest, a form was rising. It was vast, formless, a pillar of blackness that towered over her, stretching towards the ceiling. It was the thing. The original thing. Before it had a name. Before it was called Nightingale. Before it got trapped, somehow, in that little box. It reached for her. A tendril of shadow, impossibly long, extended from the main mass. It didn't move fast. It was slow. Curious, inevitable. I felt a ghost of her terror, a cold, helpless certainty of the end. She squeezed the music box tighter. Its melody, the hesitant, broken tune I knew so well, began to play. It was her last act. Her last attempt to hold on to something real in the face of the impossible. A prayer. A warning. A scream. The vision shattered. I was back in the apartment, gasping, cold sweat pouring down my temples. My eyes darted around the room. I was still on the floor. It was still here, the music box. It wasn't my hallucination. It was an echo. It was her echo. Her soul, or what was left of it, screaming its warning across time, latched to the very thing that had consumed her. She was one of the faces in the abyss. The first trophy. A movement pulled my attention. The main shadow, the keeper, the warden who was permanently shackled to me, was raising its arm. A long, featureless limb of pure anti-light. I flinched, pulling my legs in, bracing for the touch I knew would unmake me. This is it. Game over. But it didn't touch me. The arm stretched out, and a finger-like point extended, stopping a foot from my chest. It wasn't pointing at my body. It was pointing through me. at my heart, at the fear and life pumping through it. Then, the arm swiveled slowly, the impossible finger now pointing towards the open apartment door, towards the hallway where the sounds of its children feeding had faded. And I understood. The understanding didn't come in words. It was a cold, clean injection of pure knowledge, a schematic of damnation downloaded directly into my soul. It didn't want me. Not anymore. My terror was a known quantity. It had fed on my fear for days, maybe weeks. It was a stale cracker at the bottom of the box. But the super? The woman? The guy down the hall? That was new. That was fresh. That was a feast. I wasn't the victim. I was the bait. I was the walking, breathing lighthouse that drew ships to the rocks. I was the carrier, the anchor that held this parasite in the real world. As long as I was alive, as long as my heart was beating, it had a foothold. It could stay here, tethered to my life force, and send out its hunters to harvest the fear from everyone I came near. Mark. The people who came for the phone. The neighbors. The faces in its body. They weren't just a collection of its kills. They were its previous anchors, each one a beacon it had used until their light went out, their fear ran dry, and it consumed them whole, taking their final screaming moment as a trophy before finding a new host. A new lure. Me. My life was no longer my own. My existence was a weapon pointed at everyone else. To live was to sentence others to that swarm, to that blackness, to that silent, screaming collection. A desperate, insane thought sparked in the terrified darkness of my mind. It feeds on fear. It savors panic. It gets off on the helpless screaming of its prey. The girl with the music box. She wasn't just afraid. In her last moment, she played the music. It was a tiny act of defiance. A final, fuck you. The men who came for the phone, they weren't afraid. They were arrogant. They mocked it. And they woke it up, sure, but they weren't consumed. They were just swatted aside. What if? What if fear is the food, but something else is poison? My eyes scanned the floor, frantic. The chaos had left a mess. The door frame was splintered. A cheap framed print of a cityscape had fallen from the wall, the glass shattered. Near my foot lay a shard of it, a wicked-looking triangle of glass about 6 inches long. Without thinking, I lunged for it. My fingers closed around the shard, the sharp edges digging into my palm. The entity watched. Its head tilted, a gesture of silent curiosity. It probably thought this was a new flavor of desperation, a prelude to a new kind of scream. I used the wall to push myself up. My legs were jelly, shaking so hard I could barely stand. But I got to my feet. The shard of glass was tight in my fist, a small, sharp reality in a room full of impossible shadow. I was bleeding from my hand, a warm trickle running down my wrist. I turned to face it. It stood there, a silent, patient god of despair. The abyss that wore the shape of a man. It was waiting for me to run, to scream, to break down. I did not. I took a step towards it. Then another. The cold, logical part of my brain was screaming, a high-pitched siren telling me what a catastrophic mistake this was. But another part, a deeper, more primal part took over, the part that was tired of being the bait. "You want something?" I yelled, my voice cracking raw. "You want a feed?" I raised the hand holding the glass. "Here!" I screamed, a sound torn from the very root of my soul. "Take it!" And I drove the shard of glass into my own shoulder. Not a hesitant poke. I threw all my weight into it, a full, committed, self-destructive plunge. A white-hot explosion of pain erupted in my shoulder, a shockwave that radiated down my arm and up my neck. It was clean, pure, real. It was agonizing. It was mine. The thing did not absorb the act. It did not feed on it. It recoiled. A sound ripped through the room, but it didn't come from my throat. It came from the shadow. It was a shriek, a howling blast of digital static and tearing metal, a sound that felt like it was shredding the air itself. The featureless black form convulsed, spasming like a man hit by a taser. The air grew cold, a sudden shocking drop in temperature. The connection, the psychic leash that tied me to it, felt like it had been doused in acid. It burned. The pain in my shoulder was a fire, but the feedback from the creature's agony was a supernova in my skull. Through the blinding pain, I saw it happen. The tall, dark shape flickered. It visibly diminished, shrinking in on itself. Its edges, once so sharp and absolute, now wavered like smoke. From the hallway, a final, despairing shriek echoed and was then cut short. Not by death. It just stopped. All of it. The scuttling sounds, the muffled thuds, the panic. Silence. Complete and total silence from outside the door. The projections. The children of the shadow. They were gone. I had pulled the plug. The entity in front of me gave one last, silent shudder. It was smaller now, weaker. A flickering parody of the monolith it had been just moments before. It wasn't gone. I could still feel the goddamn leash. But it was damaged. It wasn't towering over me anymore. It was retreating, bleeding back into the deepest shadows of the apartment, pulling away from me, away from the pain, away from the defiance. My legs gave out. I crashed to my knees, my left hand clutching my right shoulder. Blood soaked through my shirt, hot and thick. The shard of glass was still buried in the muscle. Every beat of my heart sent a fresh wave of agony through my body. The room spun, but underneath the pain, a thought crystallized, cold and hard as a diamond. It feeds on fear, but it is wounded by will. It is poisoned by pain that is chosen, not inflicted. I looked down at my trembling hand, then at the bleeding wound. It was a horrific, desperate gambit that had worked. I had found a weapon. A terrible, awful weapon. The only ammunition was me. The smell of paint was the smell of a new beginning. Latex and primer, a clean chemical scent that promised to cover up the old. A month. It had been a month since I'd bled on my own apartment floor to buy myself a moment's peace. A month since I'd found a weapon that cost a piece of myself to fire. Mia hummed along to the cheap radio plugged into the wall, her hair tied up in a messy bun, a streak of Swiss coffee white across her cheek. She was beautiful. Seeing her here, in this half-painted living room, surrounded by cardboard boxes and the skeleton of our future, felt like a dream. We'd broken up 6 months before the incident, the stress of the city, my withdrawal, her feeling that I was locking her out. She was right. But after I called her from the hospital, after she saw the stitches and the raw, hollowed-out look in my eyes, she didn't run. She came back. This house, nestled on a quiet suburban street where the biggest event was garbage day, was her idea. A complete reset. No more sirens. No more neighbors I didn't know. Just grass and trees and us. A sanctuary. "Hand me the roller?" she asked, not looking away from the wall she was attacking with a brush. I picked it up, my shoulder giving a familiar, dull throb. The wound had closed, leaving a puckered, ugly scar. It ached when it rained, and it ached when I thought too hard about how I got it. It was a constant reminder, a barometer for a storm I prayed would never come back. "You're thinking again," Mia said, taking the roller. She knew. She could read the tension in my shoulders, the way my focus drifted. "It's over, Leo. You're safe here. We're safe." "I know," I lied, forcing a smile. I wanted to believe it more than anything. I dunked the roller in the tray, the thick paint making a satisfying squelching sound. For an hour, we just worked. The radio played forgotten hits from the 90s. The sun streamed through the big front window. It was normal. It was almost perfect. "Ugh, I need some more rags," Mia announced, wiping her hands on her jeans. "I think I saw a whole bag of them in the basement when we moved the boxes down." She disappeared through the door that led off the kitchen. I heard her footsteps on the old wooden stairs, creaking as they took her weight. I kept painting, listening to her moving around down there, the muffled sound of boxes being shifted. The house was quiet. The neighborhood was quiet. This was peace. This was what I had bought with my own blood. A few minutes later, she called up. "Leo? Can you come look at this?" Her voice wasn't scared. It was curious. I put the roller back in the tray and wiped my hands. The ache in my shoulder, a low, constant hum. I walked through the kitchen and stood at the top of the basement stairs. The air that came up was cool and smelled of damp earth and dust. "What is it?" I asked. "Just come see this. It's kinda weird." I went down. The basement was a single large room, concrete floor, stone walls. A few bare bulbs hung from the ceiling, casting a yellow, inadequate light on our stacks of boxes. Mia was over in the far corner, next to an old wooden shelving unit left by the previous owners. She was holding a small, dark wooden box. My heart didn't stop. It did something worse. It gave a hard, painful lurch, as if it had been kicked. She was brushing dust off the lid with her thumb. The box was about the size of a brick, made of a dark, almost black wood, with tarnished brass hinges. "Look at this thing," she said, a smile in her voice. "Found it tucked way in the back here. Total antique." I couldn't speak. My throat was suddenly tight. I knew that box. I knew the weight of it, the feel of the wood. I knew the tune it played. "It's a music box," she said, fumbling with the tiny latch. "Probably full of spiders. What a weird coincidence, huh? After what you told me." She thought it was a coincidence. She thought this was a charming, spooky little echo of my trauma. A story we'd tell people one day. "Don't," I said. My voice was a croak, but the latch was already open. She lifted the lid. Inside, on a bed of faded red felt, lay the mechanism. The tiny metal cylinder with its pins. The comb of metal teeth. It was identical, exactly the same. It wasn't a similar box. It wasn't a coincidence. It was the one. "Mia," I said, taking a step forward. My legs felt like they were moving through water. "Close it." "What's wrong?" she asked, her smile fading as she saw my face. The color must have drained from it. "Leo, you're white as a sheet. It's just an old box." "It's not the same one, honey. You saw that one burn." "Close the box," I repeated, my voice shaking. "Don't be silly," she said a little defensively. "It's nothing." To prove her point, she reached inside and her finger nudged the tiny lever. The music started. A broken, hesitant melody. A few notes, a pause, then a few more, tinny and sad, the song of a ghost. The anthem of the abyss. My mind didn't just flash back to the apartment. It was ripped back. I saw the tall shape of the thing, the anti-light, the screaming faces swirling within it. I felt the psychic leash snap taut around my soul, a connection I thought had been severed. It had just been slack, waiting. "See?" Mia said, but her voice wavered. Even she could feel it now. A change in the air, a drop in temperature. The happy sunlit house upstairs suddenly felt 1,000,000 miles away. Just a broken old. I didn't let her finish. I lunged, not for the box, but for her. I grabbed her arm, pulling her away from it, putting myself between her and the shelf. My eyes were locked on that small, dark rectangle of wood. The music played on, a soundtrack for the end of our new beginning. "Leo, you're scaring me! Get upstairs!" I snarled, my voice a stranger's. I couldn't take my eyes off the box. It felt like if I looked away, the tall man would be standing right behind it. I snatched the box from the shelf. The wood was cold, impossibly cold. I slammed the lid shut, cutting off the dreadful little tune mid-note. I turned and ran up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. Mia was right behind me, calling my name. I didn't stop in the kitchen. I ran, straight into the living room, to the fireplace. There were no logs in it yet, just a bare grate. I threw the music box inside. It landed with a hollow wooden clatter. "Leo, what the hell are you doing?" Mia cried, grabbing my arm, my good arm. "It's not a coincidence," I said, breathing hard, turning to face her. My whole body was trembling. It followed me. "It's not another box, Mia. It's the same goddamn box." "That's impossible," she shot back, her fear turning to frustration. "We watched it burn. Your landlord had the whole place cleaned out. It's not possible." "I don't care what's possible," I yelled, gesturing wildly at the fireplace. "That thing is not just a thing. It's an anchor. It's how it finds me. It found us." "It? Leo, listen to yourself." Her hands came up to frame my face, her eyes searching mine, full of worry and love and a terrible, devastating pity. "You have PTSD. The doctor said this could happen. Flashbacks. Paranoia. You saw an old box and it triggered you. That's all." I shook my head, pulling away from her. "No, you don't understand. The pain, the scar, that was a weapon. It hurt it. It made it retreat, but it wasn't gone. It was just waiting." "Honey," she said, her voice soft now, trying to soothe a wild animal. "We need to call Dr. Evans. This is what he's for." She didn't believe me. Of course she didn't. How could she? I sounded insane. I was a man screaming about a haunted music box in the middle of our sunny, paint-splattered living room. The sanctuary had become a psych ward, and I was the only patient. The silence from the fireplace was louder than my shouting. I was alone in this. Utterly alone. That night we went to bed without speaking. The half-painted walls seemed to mock me. The smell of a new beginning now smelled like a freshly prepared trap. Mia lay with her back to me, her body rigid. I lay on my back, staring into the darkness, my hand on my chest, feeling my heart hammer against my ribs. Every creak of the old house settling was a footstep. Every whisper of wind outside the window was its voice. I must have drifted off, because the sound that woke me was not from a dream. It was a soft, rhythmic noise. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was coming from downstairs, from the basement. I sat bolt upright in bed, my blood turning to ice water. My ears strained in the dark. It wasn't a mouse. It wasn't the house settling. It was a deliberate sound, the sound of a fingernail, or something harder, being dragged slowly across the surface. Wood, or plaster. Scrape, pause, scrape. Mia stirred beside me. Leo? She mumbled, still half asleep. What's that noise? Shh, I whispered, sliding out of bed. The floor was cold under my bare feet. I crept to our bedroom door, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the silence. The sound was clearer now, unmistakable. It was methodical, purposeful. It was doing something down there. I looked back at Mia, a lump of pure terror in my throat. She was sitting up now, her face a pale oval in the gloom. Stay here, I mouthed, my voice gone. Lock the door behind me. Do not open it for any reason. Do you understand? She nodded, her eyes wide with a fear that finally mirrored my own. I slipped out of the room, pulling the door shut until I heard the soft click of the lock engaging. The hallway was dark. The only light was a faint gray glow from the living room window. I stood there, listening. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It knew I was listening. It didn't care. My phone was on the nightstand. No. Calling the police. What would I say? There's a scratching noise in my basement? They'd think it was a prank. Or a raccoon. I was on my own. I moved through the house like a ghost. Each step was a gamble. Each floorboard threatened to betray me. I reached the kitchen and looked at the basement door. It was closed, just as we'd left it. The sound was coming from the other side. Louder now. Longer drags. Scree! Scrap! My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. It was cold. So cold. I turned it slowly, wincing at the tiny metallic sound it made. I pulled the door open just a crack. The air that hit me was frigid. It smelled of damp, of dust, of rot, and of something else. The smell of ozone, of static electricity. The smell of the apartment. The scratching stopped. The silence that followed was a physical blow. It pressed in on my ears. It was waiting. It knew I had opened the door. I had to know. I had to see. I took my phone from my pocket, my thumb fumbling to turn on the flashlight. The beam cut a sharp, white cone into the oppressive blackness of the stairwell. I pointed it down. The wooden steps disappeared into the void. Taking a deep breath that did nothing to calm my racing heart, I started down. One step. A creak. I paused, listening. Nothing. Another step. Another creak. My own breathing was a roar in my ears. The beam from my phone shook, the circle of light dancing manically on the steps in front of me. Halfway down, the cold was getting deeper, sinking into my bones. I reached the bottom of the stairs. I was in the basement now. The air was thick, heavy. I swept the light across the room. Piles of boxes. The old shelving unit. The furnace, silent and hulking in the corner. It was empty. The sound was gone. It was gone. Relief tried to flood in, but the terror held it back. It was a trick. It had to be a trick. My light beam continued its sweep. It passed over the boxes, the shelves, and then it hit the far wall. The wall directly opposite the staircase. I saw them. Gouged into the old plaster were letters. They were raw, deep, scraped into the wall as if by claws. The white powder from the plaster dusted the floor beneath them. They were fresh. They were just made. The beam of my phone trembled as I read the words. This time, I want you both. The words hung in the air, cleaner than the dust, sharper than the cold. My brain refused to process them. It saw letters, gouged and raw. It saw a sentence. But the meaning was a locked door. Then the lock broke. This time, I want you both. My lungs seized. The phone in my hand felt slick with sweat. I didn't think. I acted. I spun around and launched myself up the stairs, my bare feet slapping against the wood. The basement air, thick and foul, chased me out. I slammed the door shut, the sound a weak crack in the silence of the house. The kitchen was dark. The living room was a pit of shadows. I ran, my shoulder screaming in protest, a needle of old pain. I took the stairs to the second floor 2 at a time, my only thought a single, repeating word. Mia, Mia, Mia. I reached our bedroom door and fumbled with the knob. It was locked. Mia, I hissed, pounding my fist on the wood. Open the door! It's me! I heard a small cry from inside, then the frantic sound of the lock turning. The door flew open. She was standing there, a blanket wrapped around her, her face ghostly in the gloom. Her eyes were huge, searching mine. Leo, what was it? I heard you yell. Get your shoes, I said. The words came out like rocks. We're leaving. Now. What? What did you see? Just do it! I grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the closet. My terror was a contagion. She saw it in my eyes, heard it in my voice. The last of her doubt evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp fear that mirrored my own. She didn't ask another question. We moved in a frantic, clumsy dance, pulling on jeans over our pajamas, shoving our feet into sneakers without tying the laces. My hands shook as I snatched my wallet and keys from the dresser. Mia grabbed her phone. The house was listening. Every second we spent inside felt like a gamble. Go, I whispered, pushing her toward the door. Down the stairs. Straight to the car. Don't look back. We half ran, half fell down the stairs. I didn't dare look at the basement door. I could feel it, a cold spot in the house, a wound. The smell of fresh paint was gone, replaced by something ancient and hungry. We burst out the front door into the night air. It was cool and clean. For a heartbeat, it felt like we had escaped. The car sat in the driveway, a dark metal promise of safety. I fumbled with the key fob, my thumb pressing the unlock button 3 times before the lights flashed and the locks clicked open. We threw ourselves inside, slamming the doors shut. The sound was a shield. We were encased in glass and steel. We were safe. I shoved the key into the ignition and twisted it. Click. A single, dead sound. The dashboard lights flickered once, then died. No, I breathed. No, I tried again. Click. Nothing. The engine was dead. Completely dead. What's wrong with it? Mia's voice was thin, trembling. It was fine today. I don't know. I twisted the key again, and again. Click. The sound of absolute failure. Then, the headlights flashed on. Bright. Blinding. They stayed on for a second, illuminating the empty street, the dark shape of our neighbor's house. Then they went off. On. Off. On again. They weren't flickering. It was a pattern, a signal, a pulse. Leo, what is that? Mia whispered, shrinking back in her seat. It's not the battery, I said, my blood turning to ice. My eyes were fixed on the windshield. The cool night air was causing condensation to form on the glass. A light, milky film. I watched, unable to move, as a line was drawn through the mist, as if by an invisible finger. It was a curve. Another curve appeared below it. 2 dots formed above. The condensation was being wiped away from the inside of the lines, creating a shape, a smile, wide and predatory, and 2 empty eyes. It was laughing at us. Mia made a small, choked sound. She had seen it too. A face drawn on our windshield from the outside, by something that wasn't there. My hand automatically went to my pocket. The phone. I had to call the police. I had to call someone. I ripped it out, my thumb swiping at the screen. My screen lit up. 5 letters shone back at me in the dark. No service. Mine too, Mia said, her voice barely a whisper. She held up her phone. The same 5 letters. We were cut off. Then the streetlights went out. Not all at once. The one at the end of our driveway went first. A soft pop, and its orange glow vanished. Then the next one down the street. Pop. Then the one after that. One by one, the lights went out. A slow, deliberate march of darkness swallowing the street, coming right for us. The world shrank until the only light left was the crazed, rhythmic flashing of our own headlights, trapping us in a cage of light and shadow. Then the flashing stopped. The darkness that fell was total. The silence was a weight. I couldn't hear crickets. I couldn't hear the wind. I could only hear Mia's ragged breathing and the frantic, useless thunder of my own heart. A sound from above. Scrape. Like a single claw being dragged across the car's roof. We both froze, our heads snapping up. Then the car lurched. A violent shove from the side, hard enough to rock us on the suspension. I was thrown against the door. Mia cried out. It felt like a giant hand had just pushed us. Something's out there, I said, stating the obvious. My voice was a stranger's. Then the handle on my door began to jiggle. Up and down. Slowly at first, then faster. Frantic. It was trying to get in. I grabbed the armrest, pressing my shoulder against the door as if my weight could stop it. The handle stopped jiggling. Then, with a sound of screaming, twisted metal, the entire door was ripped outward. It didn't swing open. It was torn from its top hinge, bent backward into the night with a terrifying crunch. Cold air rushed in. I was exposed. There was nothing there, just darkness. I scrambled across the center console toward Mia, my mind a blank slate of pure animal terror. Then, her door was torn open too, the same horrifying sound of metal giving way. The same empty darkness outside. An invisible force was playing with us, tearing our sanctuary apart piece by piece. Mia screamed, a raw, piercing shriek that cut through the dead silence, full of all the horror that had been building for the last 10 minutes. A scream that said we were going to die here, in our car, in the driveway of our new home. And in the middle of her scream, a light. 2 beams of light cutting through the dark. Headlights. They swept across the lawn and pinned us in their glare. A car was turning onto our street. It was moving slowly, cautiously. It stopped 20 feet from us, its engine a low, comforting rumble. Help! My God, it was help. A neighbor. The police. It didn't matter. The relief was so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. The scream died in Mia's throat. We stared into the headlights, 2 cornered animals suddenly seeing the zookeeper. The car's engine cut. The world went silent again, except for the high-pitched ringing in my ears. The headlights stayed on, illuminating our wrecked car, our terrified faces. The driver's side door of the other car opened. A figure stepped out. A silhouette against the blinding light. Tall. Wearing a suit. The clean, sharp lines were unmistakable. It was the man from the hospital. The man with the tablet and the pitying smile. My hope curdled in my stomach. This was not help. This was not a rescue. He took a step forward, his polished shoes crunching on the asphalt. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at something past me, as if assessing the damage. The passenger door of his car opened. A second figure got out. Shorter. Bulkier. Even in silhouette, I knew that hunched, aggressive posture. It was the man who had stabbed me in my old apartment. The man whose face was a mask of brutal indifference. They both stood there, watching us. The man in the suit raised his hand, not in a wave, but as if giving a signal. He looked directly at me. I could see the glint of a smile on his face, even from this distance. He spoke, His voice was calm, clear, carrying easily through the dead night air. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, an evaluation. Excellent. The adrenal response is optimal. The psychological isolation was a complete success. He took another step forward, his gaze moving from me to Mia, then back again. Now, Mr. Evans, let's begin phase 3. My brain refused to work. The man's words hung in the air, clear and sharp, but they had no meaning. Phase 3. It sounded like something from a corporate memo, not something said on a dark street next to my mangled car. The two men stood motionlessly, backlit by the high beams of their sedan. One, the architect of this nightmare in his perfect suit. The other, the blunt instrument, his shoulders thick with violence. "Welcome back, Mr. Evans," the man in the suit said. His voice was the same as it had been in the hospital. Calm, measured, like he was discussing the weather. Not my life, not Mia's, Evans. Not Leo, my name, but a stranger's version of it. "What do you want?" I managed. My voice was a dry rasp. I was still half crouched over the center console, shielding Mia with my body. Her hand was digging into my arm, her knuckles white. The man smiled. It was a flash of white in the glare. "What we want is what we've always wanted. Data. Results." He gestured with an open palm toward my house, which now loomed behind us like a tomb. "That," he said, "is a genuine anomaly. A Class 4 incursive entity. Very rare. Very aggressive. We, acquired it a few months ago. The last test subject didn't provide a satisfactory enough stress response before expiring. So we moved it here. A much better testing ground. More domestic." I stared at him. The words were English, but the logic was from another planet. This was a science experiment. We were the lab rats. The whispers. The paint. The writing on the wall. It was all real. And these men had brought it here. They had unleashed it. "You're insane," I breathed. "No," he corrected, his tone still perfectly level. "We are pioneers. And you, Mr. Evans, are our most successful subject to date." This time it was the thug who spoke. His voice was a low growl, gravelly and mean. "He got lucky." The suit ignored him. "Not lucky, resilient. You were the only one who didn't simply break. The only one who fought back in your old apartment building. You actually found a way to hurt it. To make it retreat. Did you know that? You found a weakness. We have it all on camera. Fascinating footage." My mind flashed back to that night. The fire extinguisher. The blast of CO2. The high-pitched shriek that no human could make. I hadn't been fighting a man. I had been fighting it. "We need to know if you can do it again," the suit continued, taking another slow, deliberate step forward. The crunch of his shoe on the asphalt was the only sound in the world. "We need to replicate the results, and this time we need to push the stimulus further. See how it reacts to a different emotional trigger." His gaze shifted from me to Mia, a cold, calculating look. Protectiveness. Love. That's a powerful catalyst. The blood in my veins turned to ice. It all clicked into place. The attack on me was a baseline test. This was the real experiment. The message in the basement. This time I want you both. It wasn't the entity's message. It was theirs. "No," I said, my voice shaking with a rage that was starting to eclipse the fear. "You stay away from her." The thug laughed, a short, ugly bark. He moved before I could react. In 2 long strides, he was at Mia's side of the car. The door was already gone, torn from its hinges. He reached in, his thick hand clamping around Mia's arm. She screamed. A sharp, terrified sound. He dragged her out of the car as if she weighed nothing. She stumbled on the pavement, her untied sneakers slipping. He held her fast, one meaty hand on her upper arm, pinning her against his side. She struggled, but it was like a bird fighting a bear. "Let her go!" I yelled, scrambling out of my side of the car, my hands balled into fists. I felt nothing. No pain from my shoulder, no chill from the night air. Only a white-hot need to get to her. The man in the suit raised a hand, stopping me in my tracks. "I wouldn't, Mr. Evans. It would complicate the observation. He lifted his other hand. In it was a small black device, like a garage door opener but sleeker, with a single dull red button in the center. We've been studying it for a long time. We've learned a few things. It's largely dormant unless provoked, a state of potential energy. But we've learned how to encourage it, how to make it angry. His thumb moved over the red button. Let's see what happens when it's truly motivated, he said, his eyes glinting. Let's give it a reason to come out and play. Show us a good performance, Mr. Evans. He pressed the button. There was no click. Nothing happened for a full second. The world remained silent, frozen. Then the house groaned. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears. It was a sound I felt in my teeth, in my sternum. A deep, vibrating hum that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the earth beneath our driveway. The ground trembled slightly. A low, guttural roar echoed from within, not like an animal, but like grinding stone and tearing fabric on a planetary scale. The windows on the second floor began to rattle in their frames, faster and faster, a frantic vibration that built into a high-pitched shriek of tortured glass. The man in the suit took a deliberate step back. Even the thug holding Mia looked nervous, his grip tightening as he glanced over his shoulder at the house. Then every window on the front of the house went black. Not dark, as if the lights were out. Pitch black. An absolute, light-devouring void filled each pane of glass. And then the glass shattered. It didn't just break, it exploded outward in a shower of glittering shards. But no sound of breaking glass reached us. The low roar of the house swallowed everything. From every single broken window, and from the front door, which was now swinging wide open, the blackness began to pour out. It wasn't smoke, it wasn't liquid, it was a tangible darkness, a solid thing made of shadow spilling onto the porch, down the steps, across the lawn. It moved like an oil slick and a swarm of insects at the same time, tendrils of pure night uncoiling and spreading, consuming the grass, the driveway, everything. It blotted out the light from the sedan's headlights, and the darkness it created was deeper, colder. In the center of the amorphous, growing mass, shapes twisted and writhed, not faces, not limbs, just the suggestion of them, like a nightmare trying to remember what a human looked like. It was impossibly fast. A tsunami of shadow rushing directly toward us. Even the professionals were scared. I saw it on the thug's face. His bravado vanished, replaced by raw, primal fear. His eyes were wide, fixed on the approaching horror. He made a sound, a choked whimper. He looked at Mia, then at the shadow monster. He made his choice. With a grunt, he shoved her. Hard. He threw her forward, directly into the path of the encroaching darkness. She cried out, stumbling, her arms flailing as she fell to her knees on the cold asphalt. The thug turned and ran. He sprinted away from us, toward the dark end of the street, his heavy footfalls pounding in the sudden silence as the roaring from the house subsided, replaced by a wet, slithering sound from the shadow mass. My brain didn't process it, my body just moved. There was no thought, no hesitation. There was only Mia on the ground and the thing that was coming for her. Mia! I screamed, launching myself forward. I covered the 10 feet between us in 3 frantic strides. I grabbed her under the arms, hauling her to her feet. The shadow was almost on us, a wall of cold and dread so palpable it felt like it was sucking the air from my lungs. I yanked her backward, pulling her away from it. We stumbled together, a clumsy, desperate dance of survival. We fell. I hit the ground hard, my arm twisting under me, Mia landing half on top of me. The impact knocked the wind out of me. For a second, all I could see were the blurry, indifferent stars. The cold of the asphalt seeped through my shirt. I pushed myself up on one elbow, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The main mass of shadows had stopped its advance, coalescing in the spot where Mia had fallen, writhing as if confused. My eyes shot down the street looking for the thug. He was still running, a frantic silhouette against the dark backdrop of the neighborhood. He was maybe 50 feet away. He was going to make it. Then he tripped. He went down hard, sprawling onto the pavement with a loud curse that echoed in the night. He scrambled to get up, pushing himself onto his hands and knees. But he was too slow. A smaller piece of the darkness detached itself from the main body on my lawn. It wasn't big, no larger than a dog, but it moved with an unnatural speed, a fluid ribbon of black that shot across the asphalt. It didn't slither. It flowed. It covered the distance to the fallen man in a heartbeat. He saw it coming. He let out a yell, a raw sound of pure terror. He tried to crawl away, his hands scrabbling for purchase. The shadow thing reached him. It wrapped a single sharp tendril around his ankle. The man screamed as he was jerked backward. We heard a wet, sickening crack, the sound of bone snapping. His scream turned into a high-pitched shriek of agony as he was dragged, his body scraping against the rough road. He clawed at the ground, his fingers leaving faint scratches on the asphalt, but it was useless. He was being pulled back toward the house, back toward the darkness he had helped unleash. "No, please, God, no!" he shrieked, his voice filled with a terror I recognized from my own nightmares. He was dragged past the wrecked car, past the man in the suit who stood watching with cold, clinical interest. He was pulled across the lawn, leaving a dark trail on the grass. He was pulled up the porch steps. His screaming stopped the instant his feet crossed the threshold of the open front door. It didn't fade away. It was cut off, utterly and completely, as if a switch had been flipped. The world went dead silent. The small shadow that had taken him flowed back through the door, rejoining the silent, watching darkness within. The night was still again. I lay on the ground, gasping for air, Mia trembling in my arms. The man in the suit slowly turned his head, his gaze leaving the dark doorway and settling on us. He looked from me to Mia and then back to the house. He didn't look horrified. He didn't look surprised. He looked pleased, as if his hypothesis had just been proven correct. The man in the suit did not move. He simply stood there, a statue carved from judgment and expensive fabric. I lay on the asphalt, the sharp edges of gravel digging into my back, Mia a trembling weight against my chest. The world was quiet now. So quiet it hurt my ears. The screaming had stopped. The dragging had stopped. The house just stood there, a black hole in the shape of a home, waiting. He tilted his head, a gesture of mild curiosity. Then he lifted his left hand and took a slim, black tablet from an inner pocket of his suit jacket. His thumb swiped across the screen. The device came to life, casting a cold, blue-white light on his face. He tapped the screen a few times, his expression that of a biologist observing a successful experiment. "Remarkable," he said. His voice cut through the stillness, unnaturally loud. He wasn't talking to us. He was dictating a note. Subject demonstrates extreme mate-guarding behavior in the face of a Class 4 stimulus. The entity's aggression was successfully redirected from the primary target to a secondary hostile. Fascinating application. The words didn't make sense. Mate-guarding, stimulus. The clinical language was a wall I couldn't climb. My brain was stuck on a single, looping image. The thug's fingers clawing at the road as he was pulled back into the dark. I pushed myself up, my arms screaming in protest. I helped Mia sit up. She was shaking, her face buried in my shoulder, her breath coming in short, ragged sobs. I held her tight, my eyes locked on the man with the tablet. "You!" I forced the word out. My throat was raw. "You did this!" He lowered the tablet, his gaze finally meeting mine. There was no pity in his eyes, no remorse, only appraisal. "We facilitated, Mr. Evans. You provided the catalyst. The entity, it simply reacted." Predictably, I might add. He looked from me to Mia and then back to the dark maw of the front door. That's when it hit me. A thought that cut through the fear and the blind rage. It was cold and sharp and awful. It had moved so fast. The shadow thing. A black tide that poured from the house. It had rushed toward us. Toward Mia. It was right there, inches from her. But it didn't take her. It stopped. It waited. Then it peeled off a piece of itself and went for the thug. The one who was running. The one who had shoved Mia. The one who showed fear. It didn't come for me. I was the one who fought it before. I was the one it supposedly wanted. It didn't come for Mia. She was the bait. It went for the bigger, more immediate threat. Or maybe it went for the one who angered it. The man had pressed a button. He had encouraged it. He had prodded the beast in its cage. My mind raced. What if it wasn't just a mindless monster? What if it knew? What if it could tell who its real enemy was? Not the lab rats cowering in the driveway, but the man holding the leash. The man with the prod. The realization settled in my bones, a terrifying kind of hope. I got to my feet. I stumbled, my legs weak, but I stood. I gently pushed Mia behind me, shielding her with my body. I took a step forward, onto the dead grass of the lawn, toward him. "You're wrong," I said. My voice was stronger now. It had a new edge. An edge of certainty. The man raised an eyebrow. "Am I?" "It's not about me," I said, taking another step. The distance between us was shrinking. The wrecked car, the patch of oil on the asphalt. Then him. "It's not about her," I pointed a shaking finger at him. "It's about you. You're the one who woke it up. You're the one who heard it." A small, dismissive smile touched his lips. He looked amused. "An interesting theory, Mr. Evans. A classic case of transference. Blaming the doctor for the disease." He held up the small black remote, the one with the red button. "This is control. Science. Not some ghost story." "Then do it again," I challenged, my voice a low growl. "Push the button again. See what happens." His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. I saw it. I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes, but he recovered quickly, his face hardening back into a mask of professional arrogance. "The parameters of the test have been met. There's no need for further." "It knows you," I cut him off, my voice rising. I was almost shouting now, my words aimed not just at him, but at the silent watching house. "It knows what you did. It can feel you right now. You're the one it wants." He laughed. A short, sharp, ugly sound. "Your resilience is impressive, I'll grant you that. But your logic is flawed." He took a step back, raising his tablet as if to continue his notes. "Now, if you'll excuse." That's when I saw it, a single drop of sweat. It broke free from his perfectly styled hairline and traced a slow, glistening path down his temple. In the stark glare of the headlights, it shone like a diamond. A diamond of fear. He was scared. He was trying not to show it, but he was terrified. And the house knew it. A low hum started again, not the gut-shaking roar from before. This was different. Lower. More intimate. It was the sound of a predator that has caught the scent of its prey. The blackness inside the house stirred. It didn't pour out this time. It seemed to contract, to gather itself. The smiling man heard it too. His head snapped toward the house, his eyes wide. His professional calm shattered like cheap glass, replaced by the same raw panic I'd seen on the thug's face. "No," he whispered. "It's contained. The perimeter is... meh. Meh." The shadow moved. It didn't erupt. It flowed. It slid out of the front door like a sheet of black oil, silent and impossibly smooth. It didn't spread out. It formed a single, thick tendril, a river of night that moved with horrifying purpose. And it ignored us. It glided right past me, so close I felt a wave of corpse-cold air wash over my skin. It flowed around the spot where Mia knelt on the ground. We weren't the targets. We weren't even an obstacle. We were just furniture in the room. It stopped on the driveway, directly in front of the man in the suit. It rose up, coiling on itself, growing taller and taller until it was a solid pillar of writhing darkness, blotting out the stars behind it. It had no face, no eyes, but I could feel it watching him. I could feel its focus, a pure, undiluted hatred. The man stared at it, his mouth hanging open. He fumbled with the remote in his hand, his thumb jabbing frantically at the red button. Click, 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 click. The sound was tiny and pathetic in the heavy silence. The remote was just a piece of plastic now. The button did nothing. The lights in the house stayed dark. The entity did not retreat. It had been encouraged one too many times. It had found its own motivation. It had picked its own target. A sound tore from the man's throat, a strangled, high-pitched gasp. He stumbled backward, tripping over his own expensive shoes. He fell hard on his back, the tablet flying from his hand and skittering across the asphalt with a sharp crack. He crab-walked backward, his hands and feet scrambling against the ground, his face a mask of utter disbelief and terror. "No, this is not part of the protocol." "Containment failure. Asset is hostile. It's—" The shadow pillar lunged. It didn't make a sound. It simply collapsed forward, a silent avalanche of black. It covered him in an instant. There was no struggle. There was no fight. There was a single, muffled, wet scream that was cut off the second the darkness touched him. The shadow enveloped him completely, forming a churning, black mound on the asphalt for a few seconds. It pulsed once, twice. It looked like something digesting its meal. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. It didn't retreat into the house. It didn't slither away. It evaporated. One moment there was a monstrous mound of living darkness on my driveway. The next, there was nothing. Just the cold night air and the lingering scent of ozone and damp earth. He was gone. The world was completely silent again. No hum, no roar, nothing. I stood frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs. Mia was still on the ground behind me, her sobs the only sound in the universe. I looked at the spot where the man had been. Nothing. I looked at the house. The windows were still shattered and black, but the menacing presence was gone. The focused malevolence had vanished. It was just a broken, empty building now. It had gotten what it wanted. My eyes fell to the ground. There, gleaming under the headlights, were two objects. The small, black remote control with its single red button, and the cracked screen of the tablet, frozen on a page of neatly typed notes. Phase 3 complete. Stimulus successful. Subject. The rest was unreadable. I was safe. Mia was safe. For now. But the silence that was left behind was worse than the screaming. It was a silence filled with the knowledge of what we had seen. A silence that promised this was not over. It was just a new chapter. The sun was up. The world was bleached and quiet. A bird chirped somewhere, an obscene sound in the dead air. I sat in the driver's seat of my dead car. The key was in the ignition. I had tried it a dozen times. Nothing. Not even a click. The battery was fried, just like every other piece of electronics last night. Mia shifted beside me, a soft murmur in her sleep. Her head rested against the passenger window, her face pale. Dried tear tracks stained her cheeks like scars. For a few seconds I just watched her breathe, in and out. The simple mechanical rise and fall of her chest was the only good thing left in the world. We were alive. We were sitting in a busted car, in a ruined driveway, but we were alive. The fight was over. It had to be. My arm throbbed, a deep, grinding pain from where I'd hit the pavement. Every muscle ached. I leaned my head back against the seat, the cheap fabric rough against my neck. I closed my eyes, but the images were waiting for me, burned onto the backs of my eyelids. The shadow, the man's muffled scream, the way it all just evaporated. My eyes snapped open. I couldn't rest. Not yet. My gaze fell on the driveway, on the two things left behind on the blacktop, the little remote control, and the tablet. They sat there, gleaming in the morning light. Evidence. Proof I wasn't insane. I had to know. "Mia," I whispered. She didn't stir. Better. I didn't want her to see this. I didn't want her to know any more than she already did. Quietly, I pushed the car door open. It groaned in protest. I froze, watching her. She only shifted, pulling her jacket tighter around herself. I slipped out of the car, my sneakers crunching on shattered glass. The air was cold. I walked to the center of the driveway, my shadow stretching long and thin behind me. I knelt down, my fingers closed around the tablet first. It was heavier than I expected. The screen was a web of cracks, but as my thumb brushed against it, it flickered. A blue-white light cut through the morning glare. It still worked. My heart hammered in my chest. I swiped a smear of grime off the screen. It was a page of notes, the same ones the man in the suit had been reading. Entity 04, the Echo. Status, pacified. Stimulus expended. Analysis. Asset demonstrates selective targeting when provoked. Control parameters require recalibration. Middle manager, classified, deemed a total loss, recommending the text cut off. My stomach turned. Asset. Stimulus. Middle manager. They talked about that thing like it was a faulty piece of lab equipment. They talked about a man's death like a budget line item. I had to see more. My thumb scrolled down. Frantic. I was looking for answers. Who are they? What was that thing? Why us? Then I saw it. A folder icon in the corner of the screen. It wasn't labeled with a gear or a paperclip. It was labeled with a single, simple word. OSTs. I didn't want to. I knew I shouldn't, but I had to. My finger tapped the icon. A list appeared. A short list. Just a handful of names, each with a status next to it. Most were marked deceased, or failed integration, But at the very top of the list, under a subheading that read current prospects, Sector 7G, were two names, Evans, Ethan, status, standby, reactivation required. Read, MIA, status, standby. Reactivation required. My breath hitched. My name, Mia's name. We weren't just victims, we were prospects. We were on a list. Staring at those words, reactivation required, felt like a gun pressed to the back of my head. It wasn't over. It wasn't pacified. It was on standby. For us. My blood ran cold. I scrolled past our names, a sick feeling twisting in my gut. What else was on this thing? I saw another folder. This one was marked with a triangle symbol, like a corporate hierarchy chart. The label was oversight, This is it. This is who's in charge. I stabbed my finger at the icon. A mistake. The screen went black for a second. Then a new window popped up. Incoming video call. Establishing secure connection. I didn't do that. I tried to hit cancel to close the window, but my touch did nothing. The screen was locked. A small circle spun in the center of the screen. Connection established. A man's face filled the screen. He wasn't in a dark van or some hidden bunker. He was in an office. Sunlight streamed through a large window behind him. He was older, in his 60s, with perfectly styled gray hair and cold, intelligent eyes. He wore an expensive-looking dark blue shirt, no tie. He looked directly into the camera, directly at me. There was no surprise on his face. He looked like he had been waiting for my call. "Mr. Evans," he said. His voice was calm and smooth, amplified with a slight tinny quality by the tablet's damaged speaker. "Right on schedule. Your resilience is, I must admit, more impressive than the initial projections suggested." My mouth was dry. I couldn't form words. Who the hell was this? How did he know? He smiled, a slight knowing quirk of his lips. "I see you've recovered our field equipment." A pity about Director Thorne, but his risk assessment models were always too aggressive. He treated the assets like beasts to be prodded, a fatal lack of finesse. He glanced at something off-screen, then his eyes snapped back to me. "You, on the other hand, you demonstrated a remarkable aptitude. You didn't just fight it. You communicated with it, you understood its motivation, and redirected its focus. That is a very rare, very valuable quality." The words washed over me, a tide of absolute madness. Redirected its focus? I was screaming for my life. I was trying not to be eaten by a thing made of nightmares. What do you want?" I finally managed to force the words out. "Want?" The man chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "Mr. Evans, we are long past the stage of wanting. We are in the business of acquiring. Director Thorne's final test for you was a simple pass/fail. Survival. You passed. With honors, I might add. You successfully eliminated an underperforming middle manager for us. Think of it as an unscheduled promotion." My mind reeled. A test. This whole night. The terror. The thing in the house. The men who broke in. It was all a test. A job interview from hell. The man leaned forward, his face filling more of the cracked screen. His eyes were like chips of ice. He wasn't smiling anymore. You've proven your compatibility, Ethan. You've proven you can resonate with an asset without being consumed by it. That makes you a candidate. But the real test, the one that truly matters, isn't about survival. It's about aptitude. He held up a hand, stopping my unspoken question before I could even think it. We find them, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Or they find us. Powerful, dangerous, unexplained phenomena. We don't destroy them. That's crude. Wasteful. We contain them. We study them. We learn to harmonize with them. We provide them with a home, a purpose. And in return, they provide us with leverage. He gestured vaguely at my house, at the shattered windows and broken door. That house? It is now your asset. Entity 04 is bonded to the location, and now to you. You survived its initiation. It has accepted you. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Accepted me? It tried to kill us. A teething process, he dismissed with a wave of his hand. Now comes the choice. A career opportunity, if you will, or a warning. He looked me straight in the eye, his gaze unwavering and heavy. You can become one of us, a handler, an operator. We will provide you with resources, training, a purpose you cannot possibly imagine. You will have a power that makes governments tremble. He paused, letting the words sink in. Or, he said, and the single word was colder than any winter night, you can refuse, in which case your status will be reclassified from candidate to rogue asset, and we will be forced to send another operator, a more experienced one, to your location to pacify the situation, permanently. He didn't need to explain what that meant. The image of the man in the suit dissolving into nothing was all the explanation I needed. We weren't the targets of the monster anymore. We were the monster's keepers, and if we refused, we'd become the next test for someone else. The air left my lungs. The bay hadn't just sprung. It had been there all along. We had never been in a fight for our lives. We had been in an audition. The man smiled again, that same bloodless, corporate smile. The choice is yours, Mr. Evans. We value initiative. Take your time. We'll be in touch. The screen went black. The call was over. For a long moment, I just knelt there on the asphalt, the tablet heavy in my hands. The world was spinning. The sun was too bright. The bird was still chirping. Everything was wrong. Then the screen flickered back to life. A loading bar appeared. Backquote, downloading new protocol package, backquote. A new file appeared on the screen. It was not a document. It was not a video. It was a map of the world. And it was covered in dots, hundreds of them. Maybe thousands, pulsing, red dots scattered across every continent. I zoomed in on North America. Dozens of them littered the screen. I zoomed in further. On our state, there were 3. One of them was pulsing right where I was kneeling. The others were miles away, in other cities. Below the map, a single line of text flashed, cold and green. Backquote, active assets, 4,372. Handler initiative enabled. Backquote. Another window popped up over the map. It was a simple, stark command prompt. 2 buttons glowed on the screen. Backquote. Accept protocol. Decline protocol. Backquote. My finger trembled over the screen. Accept and become a monster. Decline and be hunted by one. Then, a new line of text blinked into existence right below the buttons. A horrific suggestion. A new feature. Backquote. Select next target. Backquote. My head snapped up. I looked at the car. Mia was still asleep, her face turned away from me, peaceful in the morning light. Innocent. Safe. For now. Something inside me broke. The fear, the rage, they didn't disappear. They crystallized. They turned into something hard and sharp and cold. I wasn't the rat in the maze anymore. I was being handed the clipboard.